Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's hearing, in which we're going to hear, I think, the last tranche of firefighters' evidence.
So, yes, there are 3 witnesses who are going to be called to give evidence today, the first of whom is Group Manager Dave O'Neill.
Right, thank you very much.
I swear by Almighty God
I swear by Almighty God
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much, Mr. O'Neill. Yes, Mr. Cleary.
Thank you. Would you please confirm your name for the record?
My name is David Michael O'Neill.
Mr. O'Neill, thank you very much for attending today. It's much appreciated. On the lectern in front of you, there is a blue folder, and if you open that folder, behind the first tab, you should find your statement given to the police dated the 7th of July of last year. Is that right?
That's correct, yeah.
And if you turn to the next tab, you should find there your contemporaneous note. Is that right?
Correct, yes.
And finally, if you turn to the third and final tab, you should find the exhibit to your witness statement, which is a sketch plan and map. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
And have you read those documents recently?
Yes, I have.
And you confirm their contents are true?
Yes, I do.
And you content for those documents to stand as your evidence to this inquiry?
Yes, I am.
Now, Mr. O'Neill, if at any time you need a break, please say so. That's not a problem. Most importantly, if at any time one of my questions is unclear, please say so and I'll rephrase them.
Okay.
The first topic I'd like to discuss with you is just to get some sense of your background and your role. Is it right that you've been employed by the London Fire Brigade since 1993?
That's right, yes.
And that on the night of the 14th of June of last year, your call sign was Echo 63?
That's correct.
You're currently a group manager for operational policy in the rescue team, is that right?
Currently acting in the role of Deputy Assistant Commissioner.
And was your role on the night group manager for operational policy in the rescue team?
Yes, it was.
And at the time of the fire, how long had you been in that role?
I'd been in a group manager role for about 4 years.
And with specific responsibility for operational rescues throughout that time?
So my reference was the head of technical rescue, responsible for some of our more technical capabilities, such as collapsed structure rescue, swift water rescue, rope rescue, etc.
Thank you. Now, turning to your experience and training, what experience have you had of fires in high-rise buildings during your career?
So, during my career, I've been to several high-rise fires. I've been a station manager since 2006, so I've taken command of such incidents. So, whilst I'm based down in the south of London, I've been to several high-rise fires.
What experience do you have of fires on high-rise buildings involving cladding?
I have no experience. The Grenfell Tower fire was my first experience I had of a tower with cladding.
Have you received any training in relation to fires on high-rise buildings involving cladding?
Not specifically involving cladding, no.
Have you had any training in relation to rapid fire spread on the face of high-rise buildings and how best to combat such phenomena?
I've not had training in rapid fire spread. We are conscious of fire spread on the outside of buildings through stuff like personal belongings on balconies, pigeon netting, nets coming out and curtains coming out of windows during the summer. And that's kind of predicted fire spread, I would say, rather than rapid fire spread.
Were you familiar before the Grenfell fire of the fire at Shepherd's Court?
I was not, no.
Have you had any previous experience of fires involving a breach of compartmentation?
I have had experience of breach of compartmentation through ill-fitting fire doors, for example, but nothing the extent of the night of the Grenfell Tower fire.
Any fires involving breach of compartmentation in respect of high-rise buildings during your career?
No, I haven't.
Okay. Can I assume that you're familiar with Policy 633?
Yes, I am.
And what training have you received in relation to Policy 633, say in the 2 years before the fire at Grenfell?
So all of our training since probably the fire at Lakanal House has incorporated high-rise and fire survival guidance elements to it. Through the various promotion rounds that I've undertaken, there's always been a focus to our adopted high-rise policy and has also incorporated fire survival guidance within that. But again, not on the scale that we experienced on that evening.
Okay. Now, on the night of the fire, you were assigned the role of Sector Commander for Safety. What training had you been provided in order to discharge that role?
So I've undertaken that role on several occasions, and that role is born out, I suppose, from being a safety officer within a single sector, and then as experience and rank sort of progresses, then to take on that role of sector safety. So it's a role that's very familiar to me. I've had no specific training in sector commander safety. However, we regularly practice different sector command roles when we do our annual incident command training.
In relation to your experience of sector commander, can you give us an idea of, say, in the 2-3 years before the fire, how many times you were called upon to act in that role?
As senior safety?
Yes.
I think probably 2 times in the 3 years leading up to that.
Can you give us an idea of the scale, the nature of the instance in which
So
you allocated that role?
One I recollect would be a warehouse fire where we had several sectors operating. We had safety officers within each sector, and we had partial collapse within the building. And that would be a typical example, one I recollect of undertaking that role.
Finally, just in respect of experience and training, could I ask Danny to put up on the screen document LFB *01256, which will be Policy 633. There you go. And if we could go to internal page 16 of that document. And Mr. O'Neill, I'll just invite you to read paras 7.65 and 7.66. Just familiarise yourself with those. Mr. O'Neill, presumably you're aware of those 2 paragraphs and the obligations they place on the safety officer.
Yes, I am.
And would these 2 paragraphs and the obligations they contain be relevant to the role you performed on the night of the 14th of June last year?
Absolutely they would. They'd be relevant to my role, and they'd be relevant to the briefings that I gave to safety officers within each sector.
Thank you. Now, if I can turn to the night itself, and in terms of timings, the LFB have given us records which indicate that you were paged at 01:30, you were mobile at 1:33, and you arrived at the scene at 02:12. Does that sound about right to you?
Yes, it does, yeah.
Now, at the point you were paged, you say that you were told it was a 20-pump fire. Whilst you were en route, did you have any idea of what role you would be called upon to perform once you arrived at the scene?
No, I didn't. As I put in my statement, mobilised to a 20-pump fire at that sort of time in the morning. You know, I suppose I expected to be going to a warehouse or a big recycling fire. They tend to be of that size. It was only when, I think as I put in my statement, I turned on my airwave radio as I was getting ready to leave that I heard fire survival guidance calls being passed over to the incident from control, and it was at that point I realised it was a residential building.
Okay. Can I now turn to your arrival at the command unit and your role assignment by DAC O'Loughlin?
Yep.
Now, once you arrived on scene, you say you went to the command unit on Bowmore Road, which we now know to be CU8. Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
And how long did it take you to get to CU8 from where you parked?
I was there probably within, a minute and a half. I actually ran from my car from where I parked. I spoke to some of the firefighters there, and they directed me directly to the CU. So I was there very quickly.
So you were there, if you arrived at 0212, you were certainly there by quarter past.
I would say
0212. You were certainly there by 2:15.
By 15, certainly, yeah. I had to get rigged into my fire gear and then make my way to the CU. Yeah.
Now, on your way to CU8, you say that you could see that, quotes, the top half of the south and east sides of the block and saw that it was a well-developed fire, close quotes. What was your thinking on how best to combat the fire on what you first saw?
At that stage, I didn't think actually that we would have the capability to combat that fire externally. For all I knew at that time, with the limited information I had, that could well have been the exterior light, and which could well have burnt off. You know, at that stage, I knew there were some FSGs in the building, and I knew that our tactics would be to fight the fire internally. So, given the size of that building and the scale of the fire that I saw, I knew that external firefighting wouldn't be an option for us.
Given that you had a sense of the volume of FSG calls en route, you saw a well-developed fire on the tower. What thoughts did you have in relation to evacuation, for example?
By the time I got to the incident, still in my mind, I think, was the fact that had that been an external fire spread, that would have been terrifying for residents that were in that building. Even if it hadn't broken through to the compartment they were in, that would have been a terrifying sight. So that may have given an indication as to why there was such a volume of fire survival guidance calls. Repeat your question again.
Given what you saw,
Yeah.
given what you'd heard, the volume of FSGs
Yeah.
whilst you were en route, what thoughts did you have in relation to evacuation of residents?
By the time I got to the tower, actually there was a fairly steady stream of people leaving the tower, and that was on their own and also accompanied by LFB personnel. So it was almost as if, you know, a steady evacuation was taking place at that time.
And were you able to see what condition people were who were being evacuated?
Varying conditions. You know, everyone was very scared. People were coming out. There was a large amount of debris that was falling around the entrance and exit to the building. So, you know, that had to be controlled. And if anything else, you know, people perhaps thought they were safe when they got to that point, and in actual fact, they still weren't safe. So there was a lot of fear around. And so some people were walking, and we were trying to control their egress. And others were being escorted by fire brigade personnel, so the conditions were varied.
These were the people you could see being evacuated as you were running towards CU8,
No, this is after I received my briefing. From where the command unit's positioned, I couldn't actually see the entrance of the tower, so everything I've just told you is actually when I arrived at the tower.
Okay. Can we go a step back in time
Sure.
to your attendance at CU8 itself? When you arrived there, is it right that DAC O'Loughlin was the IC?
Yes, he was.
Yeah. And was Group Manager Pat Goulbourne on CU8 when you arrived?
Yes, he was.
You say at page 3 of your witness statement, quotes, "When I arrived at the CU, there weren't many people about, which is unusual," close quotes. Why do you say it was unusual not to have that many people on the CU?
Well, the fact that it was a 20-pump fire that I'd been mobilised to would normally have meant that there would have been a staged, as we would call make-up, escalation of the resources to reach that point, and that would attract lots of officers, you know, before me. So I expected a fire of that size. Normally, you would have officers almost waiting for a role outside the command unit. You would also have command unit staff, you know, working busily on the command unit. When I got there, it was pretty barren. So there was, as I recall, one CU staff member, Andy O'Loughlin and Pat Goulbourne. That was it.
And can you remember, did DAC O'Loughlin, did he brief you first, or did he brief Group Manager Goulbourne first? Can you remember?
He briefed. It kind of happened at the same time. So I think Group Manager Goulbourne asked the whereabouts of Group Manager Welsh, and there was a conversation about the fact that he should join him in the town, support him. And it kind of happened at the same time then, because of my background in collapse structure rescue and building collapses generally. I think DAC O'Loughlin identified that I'd be the most suitable out of the two of us to conduct the senior safety role.
Now, in relation to Group Manager Goulbourne, was it he who asked where Group Manager Welsh was, or was it DAC O'Loughlin raised the whereabouts of Group Manager Welsh?
As I recall, I think it was Group Manager Goulbourne that asked the whereabouts.
And was Group Manager Goulbourne given any further instruction by DAC O'Loughlin?
He was told to go and support Group Manager Welsh in the fire sector.
Okay. And were those the words that were used?
To my recollection, those are the words that we used.
Now, would DAC O'Loughlin have been aware of your background in urban search and rescue?
Yes, he would.
Yeah. And can you remember the precise instructions he gave you? If you can give us the detail or the gist of the words
Sure,
he used.
yeah. So my brief was very brief. He said, given my background, he would like me to go and I think, as I recall it, he said, put some structure around the incident. So I think he was satisfied that there was a recognisable structure inside dealing with the firefighting tactics, and what was probably lacking at that point was any formal structure for the activity that was taking place outside of the tower. So he asked me to go and put some structure around it and then appoint safety officers and take that role of senior safety.
Did he go into any further detail as to what he considered to be lacking on the exterior?
No, he didn't, no. He did inform me that there was a large amount of debris falling around the building, so I kind of had that information before I went down.
Now, you were given the role of Sector Commander for Safety. What was your understanding of your responsibilities given the instructions you'd been given by DAC O'Loughlin?
So primarily my role was to identify the hazards that were present to those working and evacuating around the building. Identify and brief safety officers for each area of operations that were outside the building, and then relay that structure back to the command unit once that had been established.
Okay. Now, at page 3 of your witness statement, I can bring it up if you want, but I suspect it's not necessary. You set out the conversation you had with DAC O'Loughlin, and he says, quotes, DAC O'Loughlin then asked me to put some structure around this and some safety structures because he knew my background in USR, that's urban search and rescue. He also asked for my opinion on what effect this might be having on the building. First of all, this is presumably the fire, is that right?
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
And what did you understand him to be asking you in terms of what the effect was?
So my understanding was not an immediate report back because it was still, fairly early on in the incident. It was more to monitor that, the escalation of the fire and the effect the fire was having on the building, if it was having a detrimental effect on the structural stability of the building. So it was kind of an ongoing reference, really, to monitor the changing conditions as the incident escalated and take that into account for our own tactics.
So at this stage, when you were given your initial instructions by DAC O'Loughlin, did he say anything to you about full or partial structural collapse?
No, he didn't.
Okay. Did DAC O'Loughlin require you to give him regular updates as to what you were finding as you discharge your functions?
He did, but his role was taken over pretty quickly after that. So in actual fact, my reporting line was to the incident commander, AC Andy Rowe.
What instructions did DAC O'Loughlin give you as to the nature and regularity of updates he required from you?
Well, I think DAC O'Loughlin knows my background and knows my experience, so he didn't go into that detail on his brief, and nor did he need to. I know how regularly I need to feed back, and that's periodically every 30 minutes, or when something deteriorates or a new hazard becomes present. That would be an expectation of me.
Were you given any guidance as to how best to communicate with him? Was it by runner, by radio, or any other?
No, it wasn't. We were still operating on Channel 1 at that time, so that would be my primary means of communication. But throughout the incident, we had regular face-to-face meetings with DAC O'Loughlin and AC Rowe actually on the incident ground.
Before you left CU8, were you given any briefing as to the adequacy of radio comms and the effectiveness of...
No, I wasn't.
No. When you were allocated your role as the Sector Commander for Safety, were you able to find out whether a dangerous structure engineer had been requested?
No, I didn't ask that question because I think the structure, the establishment of a safety structure and an operating structure to the outside was more important. Given my background of working with danger structure engineers, that was at the forefront of my mind, and I know that request went in fairly early on, because in fact when I asked for it I was told it had already been requested.
And so I think the request was made at 0217.
Okay.
How long were you in CU8, if we can you remember?
Probably less than 5 minutes.
Okay. Would you have expected, given the nature and scale of the fire, would you have expected a dangerous structure engineer to have been there already?
No. I can explain.
Yeah,
because it was apparent that what was burning was the facade of the building, which could well have burnt off and actually not impacted on the structural stability of that building. So whilst it's a consideration we have for large-scale fires anyway, and fires that have been burning for some time, I wouldn't have expected a DSE to arrive any earlier than they did.
Did you have any sense that the exterior fire involved cladding at this stage?
Well, at what stage?
Whilst you're still in
CU8?
CU8?
No.
We're still in CU8 now.
Only from what I could see.
Okay. Did anyone, whilst you were being briefed, refer to cladding?
Not that I recall.
Okay. Now, if I can now turn to your role as the sector commander for safety, once you'd been assigned the role, what was your plan of action?
So initially there was a huge amount of burning debris falling around the entrance and planing away from the building, actually on two sides. It would have been on the south side and the west side. There were a lot of firefighters going about their business, hurriedly moving around in that what I deem to be a dangerous environment. So primarily it was to try and formalise some safe access in and out of the building, and that was by drawing everyone away from the debris field as it was building and have a line of access from a covered walkway. And I did that as sort of silly, I suppose, as it may seem at the time. I did that with some tape from a unit, which actually did hold up, because it's something that's recognised by the fire service. If we see a taped route, we would tend to follow it. And what it did do is keep everyone away from that south side face, really, because of the amount of debris that was crashing down around us. I wanted to get safe access egress and then put in a safety structure around that on both the south and the east side, where there was a lot, on the west side, where there was a lot of people doing stuff, firefighters doing stuff, and they seemed to be very focused on the task and perhaps not as aware as they should have been of the hazards that I saw them falling around them.
Now, as part of that role, I think I'm right in understanding that page 4 of your statement, you divide the tower into 4 sectors, is that right?
That's correct.
And just so we've got clarity, Sector 1 was the main entrance on the south side,
Correct.
Is that right? Sector 2 was the west side of the tower.
Yes.
Sector 3 was the north side.
Yes.
And finally, Sector 4 was the east side.
Yes. So the tower hadn't been formally sectorised, or the incident ground hadn't been formally sectorised on the outside at that point. There was sectorisation within the building, because generally that's how we sectorise for a high rise, whereas this had, it was a 3-dimensional incident, so it required sectorisation both within the building and around the outside.
Now, would you have expected external sectorisation to have taken place given the intensity of the exterior fire by this stage in the evening?
Yes, I would. I think it was. I think probably people were acting as if it were in place because we're so familiar with that process of sectorisation. It just hadn't been formalised, probably because of the lack of availability at that time of suitable officers to do it, because everyone was focused on the task of moving into the building.
When you when you made to establish the 4 sectors formally, were there any individuals who'd assigned to themselves the role of sector commander that you encountered?
Well, I now know that there was. However, at the time, I think you're referring to the Sector 4, the west side.
Yes.
That was the first I'd heard of it. The individual that I identified as a suitable safety officer for that sector wasn't identified as a sector commander. I'm sure they had taken that responsibility and probably doing a good job of it, but actually the priority was safety rather than managing operations within a sector. Therefore, I mean, he was assigned as a safety officer. He didn't tell me that he'd assumed the role of a sector commander, so the first I heard of it was when I heard his evidence.
Now, you say you went onto the incident ground and, quotes, decided that I needed to enter the block to get appraisal of what was being done inside, close quotes. First of all, why did you have to go inside in order to gather knowledge to discharge a role which concerned the outside of the tower?
Because I wanted to connect the activity outside with the activity inside, and as a senior safety sector safety, I had also a responsibility for safety inside the building, and I wanted to establish what had been put in place, so what structure had been put in place to cover that off. And so it was to connect the two working environments.
And so who did you go speak to in order to get that knowledge?
So my plan was to go and speak to either Pat Goulburn or Richard Welsh, whoever I came to first.
Did you manage to speak to either Mr. Goulburn or Mr. Welsh?
Not on the first entrance to the tower, I think, to help with the casualty removal at that stage.
On your first, did you manage to get any information regarding conditions within the tower on that first entry?
I did by talking to some of the firefighters. I think Watch Manager Williams, who was in the lobby area, and personally knowing some of the firefighters that had been into that building and coming out, I was able to establish what conditions they were facing.
Can you help us with any recollection of what Watch Manager Williams told you about conditions within the tower, the detail or the gist of what he told you?
I really can't. I mean, it's kind of all sort of mixed together. It was kind of just how bad the conditions were, really, and yeah, I mean, I think I established very early on there's a single staircase as well, which was hampering operations, but all I was getting back was pretty strong evidence that the conditions were pretty appalling inside.
Can you remember whether you were given any specific briefing as to whether external fire had penetrated to the interior of the building?
No.
Were you given any idea of the extent of smoke logging on the single stairway?
Probably not at that time, no.
Now, if I can turn now to the implementation and the performance of the safety sectors during the course of the night. Now, at page 5 of your witness statement, you refer to the fact that you appointed Watch Manager Beale as your first safety manager. I think Watch Manager Beale from Soho.
Yes, that's right.
On the east side, so that's sector
Yes.
4. And you go on to say at page 5, quotes, that he was to watch for large debris fall and people waving for help and to keep the grassed area clear. Now, in relation to the people seen to be waving, did you give any further specific instructions to him as to what he was to do once he'd spotted?
Yeah, the reason for that was so that we could try and ascertain whereabouts they were in the building and to ascertain whether that correlated with the fire survival guidance calls we were getting. I remember seeing people at the windows on that side, and I think at that point it was very difficult to establish whether they were being directly affected by the effects of the fire or whether they were just scared, seeing what was happening around them. So it was to establish where we had savable life at that point.
Can we talk through the system you put in place? Watch Manager Beale was instructed to look out for people waving from the windows. How was he to pass that information? Was he to pass it who was he to pass it to?
To me by radio.
And you were going to pass that information where?
I was going to pass that information back to the command unit, to the incident commander.
Okay. And during the course of the night, was the means of communication, was it supplemented by runners or any other means?
Most of our communication ended up being face-to-face. At one point we tried to establish a Channel 2 command structure for the sectors, or command channel, sorry, for the sectors. That didn't work. So we reverted back to Channel 1, and as you've heard, because of the volume of traffic over that radio, that became difficult. So in the end, most of my communication was done face-to-face.
Just dealing with each element of that, you say you tried to set up Channel 2 as the command channel.
I didn't, but the command team.
And can you remember what stage in the evening that attempt was made?
It was after AC Road arrived and taken charge of the incident, so I can't really put a time on it.
Okay. Can you remember successfully accessing Channel 2 at any stage in the evening?
No.
dealing with your communications between yourself and Mr. Beale,
Yes.
did the radio work at any stage in the evening?
Yes, we did have radio communications, but because of my position on the sort of Sector 1 on the east side, it wasn't that far for me to travel really, and I spent most of my time running around from sector to sector, but he wasn't a great distance away from me for me to be able to talk to face face or even to shout if we needed each other.
So do you consider that can I summarise your evidence this way, please shout if it's not right or unfair, that any radio problems that existed on the night didn't impede your communications between yourself and Mr. Beale?
No, I don't think they did.
You were passing on the information to the command unit, that's right, that you'd received from Mr. Beale. Did you get any sense of repeat information being forwarded by Mr. Beale in relation to, say, the same individuals from the same floors?
Not at that early stage. There was a time later on in the incident where I followed something up personally with the FSG CU, but at that early stage, it was just to pass information.
Given you mentioned it, could we deal with that individual instance? What was the particular FSG you felt the need to follow up on directly with
This
CU7?
this was someone, I think, on the 11th floor on the south side of the building who was waving a towel out of the window. And that person was kind of being protected by a crew that was working in really quite arduous conditions on the flat roof or the walkway on Grenfell Walk adjacent to the building. And we tried to communicate to that individual by using a loud hailer. I think at one point we considered writing a mobile phone number on a door that we found to try and communicate for them to leave the building. But I managed to speak to Group Manager Tom Goodall at that point to make sure that this person was on his list, as it were, that we were making efforts to, that he was aware that there was someone there that could be saved.
Can you remember at what time in the evening you made this direct approach to Group Manager Goodall? Had light broken by this stage?
I think so, probably it was starting to get light. Yeah.
Now, I think you refer to this particular incident at page 7 of your witness statement, and you say there, and I can take you to it if you help, but what you say is you could see that there was fire all around his flat, the individual on the 11th floor. The crew kept the water from their ground monitor on the area around him. They stopped the fire spreading and I feel saved his life. Is this the incident you're referring to there in your witness statement?
Yes, that's right,
yeah. Now, just whilst we're dealing with it, you refer there to the ground monitor. What was your assessment of the effectiveness of the ground monitor in containing the fire around this particular flat on the 11th floor?
It appeared to be very effective because it actually did stop the fire spread. I think what that success was due to cladding above that window having been burnt off, and therefore where they were directing water spray above and to each side of where the window was, I think that enabled the water to penetrate or to stop the fire spread. Anything that was directed directly at the cladding was just bouncing straight off, but because of the extent of cladding that had burnt away, I think that enabled the success of keeping that fire from reaching that individual.
Can I go back now to the implementation of the safety sectors? Apologies,
Sure.
I took you down another route.
Yeah.
Now, you also say in your witness statement that you nominated Watch Manager Moore as a safety manager and, quotes, directed him to monitor access and egress and assist by looking out for falling debris from a position under the covered walkway. Now, first of all, did you ask Watch Manager Moore to do anything else above and beyond those particular duties?
No, I didn't. My main concern, once we'd established a kind of route in and out of that building, was to keep that exposure to those hazards as limited as we possibly could, and that was by directing people on his command from the covered walkway straight into the front door and vice versa, and stopping people at the doorway who were egressing the building, so they could look up and almost judge a momentary pause in the debris fall to get them out. I mean, that was refined a bit later on with using the police, but I'm sure we'll talk about that.
Did you also ask him to look out for trapped residents waving from the windows as well?
I can't recall.
Is it possible, likely, probable, or
No,
you
well,
can't remember?
I think it's very likely because he would have needed situational awareness of his sector. So That's the operations that are going on within his sector, keeping everyone, both members of the public and our staff, safe, but also having the situational awareness.
And that would involve him updating you on fire spread, presumably?
Yeah, I have to say at that point in Sector 1, it was so bad and the amount of burning debris that was falling down made it almost impossible to see anything up the tower. You had the bright lights of the lobby shining at us, which was 2 floors and glazed, so a fair bit of light coming at us. So to see above that was pretty tricky. Actually, you had more chance up on the walkway to see what was going on in the building.
And would you go up to the walkways to see what was going on, basically?
So I went to the walkway many times. I mean, first of all, when I returned from appointing Watch Manager Beale as a safety officer in Sector 4, I became aware then that there was water being played onto the building from this walkway. So I went up to investigate, and that's where I met Watch Manager Collins from Paddington and his crew that were using the ground monitor to stop fire spread from the west face round to the south face. They were trying their best to suppress that, but also they were using a second smaller hose reel to extinguish some of the burning debris that was falling down, because there were flats up on that walkway that actually still had people in at that point, but there was a danger that they would catch fire from the burning debris falling onto their porchways and onto their flat roof.
Okay. Going back to Watch Manager Moore, presumably, given his position, you communicated with him face to face rather than radio?
Yeah.
Now, I think it's at this point in the evening that you established a new access point through the windows and panels of the office kitchen space on the west side of the tower. So that's in Sector 2. Is that accurate?
Yeah, so the conditions were that bad in sort of Sector 1 that I asked the crew to make alternate access in Sector 2, which was the east face, because at that point there was no fire on the east face, and I firmly believe that we could stop the fire from spreading. For our internal operations, I thought we could stop it spreading round. So I asked for alternate access to be made in Sector 2. Initially, that was done by ladder, and the news came back to me that, Governor, we've got an access, but it was actually a pitch ladder. So I knew that wasn't acceptable to me, because if we evacuate members of the public, we don't want to take them down a ladder. So I gave instructions for the crews to smash their way through the panels and give us a wider, easier access ground level.
Thank you. Now, you say later on in the evening you instructed and appointed Watch Manager Gregory to be the safety manager in Sector 2 for the west, so that's the west side, is that right?
That's correct.
Now, when you appoint, say, Watch Manager Beale, you've got Watch Manager Moore, and you've now got Watch Manager Gregory, is it you're just looking for someone of Watch Manager rank or above and nominating them, and nothing more than that?
Yes.
Apologies for asking a lawyer-type question, but can you remember what time of the night you appointed Watch Manager Gregory to be the safety officer?
Yeah, it was, I can't remember a time, no.
Okay.
I can give you a reason why, but I can't remember the time.
Can
so the reason why is, as we had that successful access, we actually moved our operations around to that west side. So we had the London Ambulance Service were positioned up on a hill where the main breathing apparatus area was. That was quite a long travel distance to get casualties to better care. The walkway that would be the obvious cover was actually flooded. So that would have been an inappropriate area to have our casualty handling area. And at that point, I think due to the risk assessment of the London Ambulance Service commanders, they wouldn't allow paramedics to enter the lobby. So we couldn't have any medical assistance where we really wanted them, which was in the lobby to triage casualties at the point they were brought down the stairs. The closest they got was at the end of the row of garages, which was in Sector 2. So that was kind of established as a holding area and a new casualty handling area, which was actually closer than the previous one up on top of the grass hill.
Thank you. The next stage, the next sort of task that you appear to have done is, and it may be helpful if I could ask you to turn to your contemporaneous note. And Danny, this can be found at MET *05281. And if I could ask you to turn to page 2 of that. And Mr. O'Neill, you'll see it's roughly 10 lines from the bottom of the page. You say, I checked in with station manager Kipling up on the hill in Sector 3, Lancaster Green. And if Danny could amplify that, thank you. Which has been used as a holding area for crews. I updated the waiting crews regarding the current situation. Can you remember now the detail of the update you gave at that stage?
Yeah, I can. That was directly after I'd met with AC Andy Rowe, where he informed me that that the guidance given for fire survival guidance had been changed, or we were instructing people to leave the building if they could. That prompted me then to go and speak to the crews that were on top of that hill, and I gathered the junior officers together that were up on the hill, and I gave them a brief that conditions would have changed inside the building now, so the fact that we would potentially have large numbers of people leaving the building on that single staircase meant that perhaps they wouldn't be able to complete the task that they were assigned, and they may well spend their time almost guiding, handballing residents out. So it was to prepare them for a change in tactics, if you like, inside the building, and a change in the conditions that they, because most of those people had been in once already, so it was kind of a change in the conditions that they had already experienced.
Okay. Now, you say this was after stay put had been withdrawn.
Yes.
So it's sometime after 247 in rough and ready terms.
Okay.
When AC Rowe updated you on that,
Yes.
did he seek any advice from you, given your particular experience and background, as to how best to evacuate people, how best to safely evacuate people, I should say?
No, not specifically.
At any stage in the evening, were you asked, given your particular background and expertise, on advice as to how to execute a safe evacuation, whether total or partial?
I don't see that being relevant to my particular area of expertise, but answer no.
Okay. The reason why the question arises is simply because of your background in search and rescue, that evacuation may form a part of that.
Yeah.
No.
No.
Okay. When you were, or as part of the update you were giving to Station Manager Kipling, did he give you any update on the availability of EDBA crews?
I could see for myself the resources we had in hand, and there was a lot. There was a lot of resources there. So I could see for myself what we had in hand, and yeah, it was in large numbers.
And you had no sense there was a deficit or a deficiency?
Not at any stage of the evening.
Now, if I can ask you again, Danny, could I ask you to go back to Mr. O'Neill's contemporaneous note on page 3 of that contemporaneous note? And if I could ask you to look at paragraph 9, or the paragraph that's numbered 9, rather, and the second element of that, you say discussion with the IC to reverse FSG guidance and get people to evacuate. Working outside of agreed protocols to mix EDBA and SDBA was justified, as was recommitting EDBA crews for a second wear, both of which should be reviewed and established for future consideration. First of all, were you involved in any of the discussions regarding, first of all, availability of EDBA crews?
No, not of availability, no.
Were you involved in any discussions regarding recommitting of EDBA crews?
Yes, I was. Yeah.
And can you give us the detail of the discussions that you were involved in?
Okay, so as Sector Commander for Safety, I had many discussions with AC Rowe, and I've worked with AC Rowe for quite a few years now. We've got quite a good relationship, so we did bounce a lot of ideas off of each other, and I suppose he wanted to use me as a sounding board. Whilst it was an obvious thing that we had to do, it would have formed part of my...
Negotiating and preparing for Brexit is one of the most complex tasks.
Sorry about this.
That's okay. Yeah, so it would have changed my risk assessment. So it would have changed the situation for me. So it was right and proper that we would have had those discussions, and it was right and proper that we would move away from our current policy and use the resources we had to do what we had to do on the night.
And again, to ask the question, and your advice was sought presumably because of your background in USR?
No, this is just my background as a senior fire officer. My background working with fire rescue unit crews, who are the ones who carry EDBA. You know, I know many of them personally, and I know that, you know, none of them would have hesitated to do it. It was, if anything, it would have only been policy holding us back from doing it, and that wasn't a good enough reason on the night.
If I can now turn to the topic of the change of advice from stay put,
Yep.
And you'd adverted to it there in the quoted extract from your contemporaneous note. Apologies, we're retracking somewhat, but just to identify the topics we're dealing with. Page 5 of your witness statement, and we can go to it if you need to, you say that you remember discussing with AC Rowe, quote, whether to overturn the FSG advice being given from stay put to get out if you can. Now, can you remember the stage in the evening when you had that conversation with AC Rowe?
Yeah, so I think it was probably the first time I actually saw him, and I think it was more of a one-way discussion, if I'm honest. It was more
Going
him
which
telling
way?
me, him telling me that that's what had happened. So that's what prompted me to go and then brief the crews about the change in situation. So at that point, I thought, because of the flow of people coming out the building, that probably that had happened, if I'm honest. So yeah, as a discussion point, it was more for me to go and inform me to change my own risk assessment.
And did you give him any advice as to how best safely to get people out and down of the tower?
We both knew we had crews in from the bridgehead, you know, as high as we could. I can't recall where we were at that point, but we would have had a system in place, and hence my briefing to the crews that actually that could have led to lining the staircase to guide people down in a smoky environment. So that's kind of a given, if you like.
Okay, so because it's a given, can I summarise your evidence in this way? Because it was a given, it wasn't something that you explicitly discussed with AC Rowe. Is that a fair summary?
Yes.
Okay. Now, in your witness statement, you say you considered the change of advice, quotes, to be essential because of the number of faces we could see at the windows, and it was agreed. What thinking did you have at that stage as to how you were going to communicate the change of advice to residents who were still within the tower?
So I didn't have, other than the loud hailer we had on, you know, at our disposal up on the walkway. That was being conducted by people within the building. So, you know, when we were, I think at that point we'd had 2 people actually faced with the most horrendous of decisions and took a decision to jump from the building. I was very mindful that waving of arms and kind of beckoning, and I do recall considering that, may have been misconstrued as asking people to jump. And for that reason, I discounted, if you like, physical communication. So I'm very clear about that, because I didn't want to encourage that. So we went back to the loud hailer, and really it was the responsibility of those working inside, and they had that brief by then. So.
And so you say we went back to the loud hailer. Was a loud hailer therefore deployed on the outside, calling up to residents?
Yes, it was.
How many loud hailers?
Well, I knew about one on the roof. I now since know there was another one down on the Sector 4. But there was so much noise going on. There was a kind of with the debris crashing around us, the engines running of the fire appliances providing water. There was kind of a zipping noise of this molten metal zipping past us. There was so much noise on the incident ground. Really, the loud hailers were useless.
I was about to ask you just the effectiveness of the loud hailer as a means of communication, given the surrounding sound. You got no impression from the actions of residents still within the tower that they'd heard the advice. Is that a fair summary?
No. And I was really conscious about, you know, how scared people would be in that environment. And I was, having experienced 2 people jumping from the building, I was really conscious about not promoting that, and I couldn't have forgiven myself for encouraging that, if you like. So no.
Could I ask you to turn up page 5 of your witness statement, and it's the bottom, the last paragraph on that page. And then you say the radios throughout the incident were not great. The CU tried to set up a command channel, but it didn't work. I did a lot of running between sectors to and from CU DAC O'Loughlin and Assistant Commissioner Andy Rowe, now Incident Commander, who came to me to get updates. At one point we discussed whether to overturn the FSG advice being given from stay put to get out if you can. I said it was essential because of the number of faces we could see at the windows, and it was agreed. And this is the bit I'd like to talk to you about.
Yep.
I then made my way to the BA main control on the east side, Sector 4, near the north end of Grenfell Road. I gathered the crews and gave me new information. AC Row in charge, 40 pumps fire, FSG advice overturned. The last was particularly important to make them aware of potential increased casualty traffic in the stairwell and the need to facilitate it. Now, I think we adverted to this slightly earlier on.
That's what I referred to, yes. Yeah.
What advice did you give them as to how best to get people out of the tower safely, or as safely as they could?
I didn't. It wasn't my role to do that. So they would have received a detailed brief from the commanders at the bridgehead. I wasn't in a position to overturn any briefing that was already going on internally. So it was just more to prepare them for a change in dynamic, to let them know what resources we had on the incident ground, and to let them know that we had a new incident commander, or to question whether they did know we had a new incident commander. So it was preparatory rather than a briefing on tactics.
Just so that we can understand your reasoning, why did you place such primacy on instructions given at the bridgehead as opposed to any advice you might give, given your background in USR, as to how best to facilitate evacuation?
Yeah, just to clarify, my background in urban search and rescue is rescuing people from collapsed structures. It's not evacuating a building before it's
from
collapsed.
A particular confined scenario.
Yeah. So the reason I gave that brief to the crews there is because they'd already been in once in the main, and they had an experience. I wanted to make it absolutely clear that it would be a different experience, and I have to say that those crews there, going into that fire one time is exceptional. Coming out and seeing the deterioration of that building, knowing and volunteering to go back in a second time is beyond exceptional. And I wanted to prepare them for a role they might have set themselves in their head, and particularly, as I know from experience, when you're given a task at a bridgehead, when you can't perform that task because you meet someone on the stairway or you get involved in something else, another rescue, it's quite frustrating. And so I wanted to prepare them for the new experience they were going to go back into.
You referred there in the paragraph I quoted that you discussed with Mr. Rowe whether to withdraw stay put. When you were having that discussion, was Mr. O'Loughlin there at the same time?
No.
No, it was just you and Mr. Rowe, was
Yes.
it? Do you know at what stage that Mr. Welsh and Mr. Goulbourne were given an update as to the change advice?
No.
You didn't overhear any instruction
No,
being communicated to them?
No, I didn't hear it, no.
Okay. Can I now turn to a separate topic, which is the involvement of the dangerous structure engineer?
Yes.
Now, we don't need to go to it, but we can do if it helps you. At the top of page 6 of your witness statement, you say that, and I quote, "I then took a moment to review the building. The east side, Sector 4, had the worst fire, and I tried to make an appraisal of what might happen to the building." Just so we get a point in time, this moment when you reviewed the building was after AC Road given the order to change advice, is that right?
Yeah, I think so, because of the way it's written in the statement.
Was this the first time you'd had the opportunity to carry out a considered review of the state of the fire?
No, I think it wasn't the first opportunity. I just think that because of the time that had elapsed, it was probably about time that I had to consider what effect this intense fire was having on the building. So whilst the time leading up to that was dealt with putting in tactics and structures, I think at that point I had a moment to actually consider the time I'd been called to the incident, and then how long that fire had been burning on that side, and the debris field that was sort of the stuff that was falling down, to consider further impact on the structure.
What was the conclusion you reached following this review?
So the top of the building, what was exposed by that time, were kind of, they looked like concrete fascia panels, really large concrete panels with big circles in, and I couldn't see from my position what was holding them together, and I didn't know if it was part of a the refurbishment structure, and I was really concerned, given the size of some of the debris that had fallen down, that actually if those panels started to come down, you know, they would kill anyone that was in the area. So I, at that point, I think I just spoke to Watch Manager Bill and just made sure that we pulled back a bit from that area. And I had people at that time who I trained with in collapse structure, training in the past, you know, shouting at me to put in a cordon 1.5 times the height of the building, which is kind of what we would do for something that you think is going to collapse. But at that, and I didn't think it was going to collapse. I was just worried about these large slabs falling from the roof.
And at this stage, you're looking up at the building. Had you met the borough surveyor by this stage, or was it after you'd met him?
No, I hadn't.
And if I can refresh your memory, if I could ask Danny to turn up your contemporaneous note again on page 2. And if I could ask Danny to highlight the bottom paragraph, which starts, "I had some concerns." And there you set out your contemporaneous recollection, which was, "I had some concerns regarding the integrity of the building due to the intense heat. Aware that a structural engineer had been ordered, I chased their ETA." Now, stopping there, was the absence of a structural engineer a concern, a hindrance at that stage? Can you help us?
No, I don't think it was. It was just part of my forward planning, really. So I was just keen to establish an early relationship with a suitably qualified dangerous structure engineer, actually, as to how this was going to impact on the building.
Can you remember how soon after you were able to review the state of the building, how soon after the borough surveyor arrived? Can you remember?
Yeah, I think it was quite soon. Again, by the way, this is written in my statement. I think it was fairly soon. This I think the name's right. This Amir turned up.
And I want to summarise it fairly, but you didn't get much in terms of substantive assistance from him. Is that a fair way to put?
That's a polite way of putting it. I think actually once I showed this gentleman around the building, and you know, I'm not criticising the gentleman involved. Quite often we ask for dangerous structure engineers and we get people who sign off people's extensions, and boroughs now are even sharing resources, so there's less consistency from the advice we get. So when we ask a local authority for a dangerous structure engineer, we may get a qualified surveyor who's not used to dealing with fires, who's not used to dealing with collapsed structures. When I showed him the building and the extent of it, he asked me how many people I was thinking of putting into the building, i.e. firefighters, and whereabouts. I told him that we had 50 people in that building, at which point he just put his head in his hands and just started saying no like this, you know, almost overwhelmed by what he was seeing.
And was it after that conversation that you telephoned Mr. Allen?
He got Mr. Allen on the phone and handed the phone to me, or I asked to speak to him on the phone, who I understood to be a more senior, more qualified engineer.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but the gist of that conversation was that Mr. Allen told you he was on his way and he advised you that the building wouldn't totally collapse or pancake due to its construction type. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, it was very cool at that point, and told me that there was 2 to 4 hours fire protection on that building, as in fact had the first gentleman. So the fact that the fire had been burning for that time at that point, you know, that had been exhausted, but they were both adamant that there was 2 to 4 hours protection for the compartments in that fire.
Okay. You then go on in the highlighted part, say you passed on this information to the C unit. Could we just try and get a timing on that? And we have some documents which may assist Mr. O'Neill. AC Row provided a log, and there's an entry on that log. And if I could ask Danny to turn it up, it's Met *0 5404. That's page 2. And if we can look at 406, penultimate entry. If I'd ask you just to refresh your memory, or read it, you may not have seen it before.
Yep.
Now, can you remember whether your first conversation on the telephone with Mr. Allen was before or after 406?
I think it was before.
And is it likely that the information that you received from Mr. Allen you would have fed back to Mr. Rowe?
Yes, it is.
Okay. If I could ask Danny to turn over the page to rather 2 pages, page 4 of the log, and the timing entry at 04:51 at the top of the page, which reads structural surveyor in attendance at leisure centres to make a decision on integrity of the building. It looks, well, the structural surveyor was clearly in attendance by that stage. Does that accord with such recollection of timing as you now have?
It does, and I suspect that was the second surveyor, but
Mr. Allen.
yes.
And if I could just finally, just to help you fix yourself in time, if we look down at 5:32, Mr. O'Neill, I'll let you read that.
All right, okay. Okay, so that would confirm then that it was the initial engineer if Mr. Allen's inbound at that point.
And does the advice that's recorded there accord with your recollection of the advice you received?
Yes, it does. So Mr. Allen was able to tell us the date the original building was built. He confirmed our knowledge of its construction type, and he if any concerns, I think it came up later on that the building wouldn't collapse in its entirety, but if anything, if a column was displaced on any of the corners, that you might have a kind of just a corner partial collapse, which is something that happened at Ronan Point, I think, some years ago, and I think that's what everyone had in mind.
Is that the collapse in the late 60s?
Yes.
Can I ask you, just whilst we're dealing with Mr. Rowe's log, just ask Danny to turn over the page to page 5, and the entry at 6:13, which is roughly the middle of that page. And you say that DSE District Surveyor could not get high enough, no floor collapse pancake, frame building, max fire resistance 4 hours, firefighter shove 2 hours if columns fall, not saying will collapse, if no people let it burn, will attempt to locate plans. Now, does that summary there accord with your recollection of the further discussions you had with Mr. Allen?
It does. It seems quite late for me. So I attempted to get Mr. Allen into the building to see some of the rooms and some of the lower affected rooms, so he could fully satisfy us all really on the structural integrity of that building. I mean, that failed. We tried to get him in. It took him to a point that was very smoky. I think he wasn't comfortable in that environment at all, so he asked to come out. I think at one point we also got him up into our aerial ladder platform as well, so we could have a look at the what he could see from the outside of the building.
Okay. Linked to the final topic for now I'd like to discuss with you, Mr. O'Neill, that's debris.
Now, Mr. Kinnear, how are you getting on with Mr. O'Neill?
Well, this will take us to 11:10, where, so I'd ask for almost statutory 5 minutes, so I can review my notes. So we're not far off a break, if that's.
Oh, well, if you think you're going
convenient.
to get to the end of this topic in a few minutes, let's carry on. You're happy to carry on?
Yeah,
for me?
sure.
Mr. O'Neill, final topic is debris, which you've adverted to on a number of occasions. What steps did you take to protect hoses from falling debris?
Little, I would say. So as you're aware, falling debris then damaged the hose lines that were feeding the dry rising main, and at that point they were almost buried in the area around the building. So no steps.
No steps at all.
No, I'm trying to think. Not that I recall.
Could I ask Danny just to draw up policy 633 again, and it's LFB quadruple 01256, and it's internal page 10. Okay. And if I could ask you to highlight paragraph 7.7 at the top, near top. Mr. O'Neill, I'll just ask you to refresh your memory. Now, looking at paragraph 7.7 then, Mr. O'Neill,
Yes.
why was it, let's take it stage by stage, did you give any consideration to putting equipment in place to protect hoses from the falling debris?
I think the hose lines going in were taking the shortest route in, and those feeding the dry rise in main were very quickly covered. So at that stage, no.
Okay. Did anyone raise with you the need to take any steps to protect hoses, whether firefighters or the incident commander and people in between?
No.
No. Can you help us as to why not?
I just think that there was a photo I was hoping to submit. The debris field, everything was buried. We couldn't see hose lines. We were climbing over debris to get into the building.
And as debris was falling down, presumably,
yes,
as well.
And that was building up, and it was obviously dangerous underfoot, to say the least. But everything was buried really quite early on, and I think that's probably why, actually.
And can you help us, as the debris fell, did it continue to burn?
It did, but it was being extinguished. Right. So the access to the west, to the east side, sector 2, had a kind of a catwalk wire mesh system over it, which was kind of protecting that area close to the building from large debris fall. It was beyond that where the debris field was building, and it literally buried everything around it.
Okay. Mr. O'Neill, if you forgive me, I'd be grateful for 5 minutes just to see if there are any further points which arise. But for now, I've got no further questions. Could I ask you to rise for those 5 minutes?
Well, I think we might be sensible to take our normal break at this point, don't you think?
I'm in your hands, sir.
Well, I think 5 minutes is a bit meagre, so we'll have a break for 10 minutes.
Yes, sir.
Give you a chance to stretch your legs, have a cup of coffee, whatever.
Okay.
Back at 11:20, please, and please don't talk to anyone about your evidence while you're out of the room.
Yes, sir.
All right, I'd like to go the usher then, please. 20 past then, please.
Thanks, sir.
Well, Mr. Kinnear, have you some more questions?
Sir, yes.
Yes, well, I think Mr. O'Neill's just about to come back in. Right, Mr. O'Neill, I think a few more questions, as usual.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
No problem.
Thank you.
Mr. O'Neill, thank you very much. First of all, could I ask Danny to bring up page 6 of your witness statement, which is MET 000. Brilliant. And if we could look at the last 7 or so lines of the first paragraph on page 6. And you say there that in relation to concerns about building collapse, you thought that as long as crews stayed near the core of the building, they would be okay. First of all, how do you ensure that firefighters stayed near the core of the building?
So that was a brief that I fed into Group Manager Goulburn in the tower, that wherever possible to use that as a kind of safe haven, if you like, which would have been the lobby area. And then it was the extreme corners, I suppose, of each flat or of the building that we were most concerned about, if there were displaced columns, as we found out later that there were. That would be a primary cause of collapse for us. So that was a tactic that I fed into Group Manager Goulburn.
And what effect would compliance with that advice have on the conduct of operations within the tower?
If I'm honest, I think firefighters would have just done what they needed to do. I don't think it would have had much effect. Similarly, when I was asking for reports of loud cracking, banging, or signs of sagging floors and displaced columns, again, with the conditions that I knew were in that building, that was a tall order. So I think firefighters would have done what they needed to do. It was just, I needed to pass that information across so it was included.
In any other instance, would that have been an acceptable level of risk?
No, absolutely not. The discussion I had with Andy Rowe, and I know it's documented, about whether we carry on or not, we had several of those discussions throughout the night. At what point do we stop? And you'll see from his evidence the Human Rights Act and the Fire Rescue Services Act were used as a basis of our strategy to keep on going, even in the event. And luckily, it didn't come of a serious injury to one of our firefighters.
Could I turn now to a separate topic,
Yes.
and that concerns helicopters?
Yes.
Did you ever have need to communicate with the helicopter?
No. Are you talking about the police helicopter?
Yes.
No. I had a discussion with AC Rowe about the use of helicopters for potential evacuation from the roof. We had a dubious report of someone on the roof on a Facebook account, I understand, and we considered requesting a Coast Guard helicopter, but almost as quickly we discounted it because of what we know about putting someone above that sort of heat, and on a winch it was just not viable.
Okay. And what were the other risks that flowed from deployment of a helicopter for the purposes of rescue of people from the top floor?
I don't think anyone in any agency would have committed an airframe directly above the fire. It's as simple as that, where the police could give us an observation from a different perspective by hanging off, setting off from the building. I can't think of an agency that would have committed directly over the top of that. The heat that was being given off from that building across all 4 sides of that building, I can't think of an agency, not even the military, would have committed to that environment.
Could I turn now to another separate topic, and that's the dangerous structure engineer?
Yes.
And I think in earlier evidence you said that in your first attendance to the C unit, you asked about a dangerous structure engineer, and you were told one had just been ordered.
Yes.
And that appears to be around 217 or thereabouts.
Okay.
The first record we've been able to find of the attendance of the DSE was 451. Now, can you remember, again, apologies for a lawyer's question, can you remember when you were first told that the DSE had arrived at the site?
I can't put a time on it. I know that they were directed straight to me, so there was no delay in me talking to them, but I can't. It was dark when I spoke to the first engineer. And, you know, I can't, it was, because we discussed the number of firefighters we had in the building, I think it was fairly soon after I made that assessment, so I struggled to put a time on it.
You refer in your evidence to chasing for an ETA from the dangerous structure engineer. How did you go about chasing? Were you contacting the CU? What were you doing?
Yeah, so I would speak to the CU, and the CU would speak to our control room, who would then speak to the local authority and ask for an ETA. So it's...
Did you emphasise that the need was a priority? Did you use that word?
No, because at that point, the arrival of that engineer didn't change anything. So it wasn't a priority. It's just it was something we had to consider. You know, something we had to get done.
We don't need to go to it unless you'd like to. There's a reference in the log at 0312, a call for a dangerous structural engineer as a priority. Do you remember that?
Well, I wouldn't know about that, no.
There's also another reference at 336 from CU8 for an ETA, or whether there'd be a direct line to DSC to allow them to liaise. Were you responsible for asking that call to be made?
No, every opportunity I had to speak to the incident commander, you know, that would have been part of our conversation. Where is this dangerous structure engineer? And as I said before, this is it's an ongoing problem for us and something we're hoping to resolve now.
Just for the sake of completeness, were you aware of a further call at 348 from CU8 for an update on the arrival of the DSE? Were you aware of that?
No.
Would you emphasise the need for a DSE when you were giving updates to AC Rowe? Or was it something that he prompted?
No, I think it would have formed part of all of our conversations until they arrived, just to keep the pressure on, really, because in our planning and you know, we're repeatedly committing people to this building. We wanted someone with some knowledge of the refurbishment and some knowledge of the integral structure of the building and the impact that the intensity of the fire would have had over that prolonged period of time. So it was something that we would have just kept the pressure on to satisfy our own risk assessment.
Did you have cause to speak to Mr. Allen as to an explanation of the time he'd taken to arrive at the tower?
No, I worked with Mr. Allen for some time, even after the fire, and no, I think I've established he was fairly collected when I spoke to him on the phone. He wasn't showing the same behaviours as his colleague until he arrived, of course, and then, you know, I think he had a different take on it.
In your conversation with Mr. Allen, did you refer to the need for his speedy arrival or urgent arrival?
Yes, I did. When I spoke to him on the phone, I asked him, and at the time, actually, he was very close. So I kind of put across what had already been told by his colleague, which he confirmed about the 2 to 4 hour fire resistance. I explained that actually we're about 4 hours into the incident already, you know, or thereabouts, 3 to 4 hours, and the fire was burning far more intensely than anyone probably I would have expected, let alone he would have expected, and so that would have changed perhaps the behaviour of the building.
In your discussions with Mr. Amir, did he refer at all to the use of cladding as part of the refurbishment? Was he aware of that?
He was aware of that, yes.
And did he communicate that awareness to you?
He just told me that the building had been recently refurbished. Didn't go into I mean, it was clear that the cladding was burning off and falling off, so...
And again, did you refer to the presence of cladding with Mr. Allen in your conversations with him?
Again, I did, and he spoke to me about the refurbishment, but actually I was more interested in the integrity of the building behind the cladding, the actual real structure of the building, not the facade, and the intensity that the fire would have on the actual concrete structure rather than anything that was just burning and falling off. I wasn't particularly concerned about.
And so did Mr. Allen specifically refer to cladding when he was giving you a debrief on what the refurbishment involved?
The term cladding was used consistently throughout that night, so it didn't come from him. It may have come from me, but that was the general term used for what was on fire and what was falling.
Could I now turn to a separate topic, and it's the gentleman on the 11th floor?
Yes.
You describe in your statement to being told by a crew of a man who kept appearing, disappearing at a window, waving a towel. It's believed that he was on the 11th floor. Did you have discuss this gentleman and his location, how to rescue him with, for example, Watch Manager Steve Collins?
No, so Watch Manager Collins and his crew were wholly occupied by stopping the fire spreading to this person and dealing with the burning debris that was falling around and potentially setting light to the flats that were on the Grenfell Walk. So he was at an elevated position, so he wouldn't have had an opportunity to take part in any rescue from his position. What we could do is just establish where the individual was, and they kept coming and going to the window, so there'd be nothing, and then that wouldn't stop operations. Then a towel would appear again, and it was more a case of trying to pinpoint where they were in the building and making sure that the Fire Survival Guidance CU had that on their records and had and then in turn had committed crews to that location. So as far as I'm aware, in my own involvement, that was the first time we actually managed to triangulate a rescue, because from having seen it, calculated it, confirmed from the FSGCU, and then to be told actually by the FSGCU that they'd been rescued, I got that information back.
And when you saw the gentleman at the window, was the ground monitor already set up and spraying water? It sounds as if it was.
Yes, it was, yeah, because I think early on that person, I understand, has some disability. I think they may be blind.
Could I stop you there? Did you know that at the time, or is that knowledge you acquired after the event?
It's knowledge acquired at the event, but...
and how did you acquire that knowledge?
Well, I think when they were rescued, I think it became apparent. But it was this towel that kept appearing. So we never saw an individual. We saw an arm and a towel waving out of a window. And bearing in mind the location of that flat and how damaged other flats were in that kind of area, it was almost a miracle that that person survived.
Yeah. Can you remember what time you first saw the gentleman at the window waving the towel?
I can't.
No.
I'm sorry.
Can you remember where the ground monitor was positioned?
Every time I went up to the walkway, I kept pulling that crew back because they kept edging their way forward to try and get the ground monitor.
And they were on the walkway?
They were up on the walkway. So they were trying to position that ground monitor, which has got quite it throws a fair distance of water. So they were trying to edge forward to, I think, encapsulate the east side as well as the south side, and it was me that kept pulling them back because they were absolutely exposed to the debris that was falling around them. And I was really clear that I wanted them to have safe egress if there was any partial collapse on that side, that they could escape. And in true fashion, they completely ignored me, really, and every time I went up there, they'd move forward again and repositioned it. But so the monitor moved. It was from that kind of on the corner of the south west side, and they were edging to try and get the most coverage they could from it.
And you mentioned the triangulation in order to effect the rescue. Were you given any information about the FSG calls being made by the gentleman?
No, and I didn't consider it to be an FSG call as such. I knew that there was a savable life, and so I introduced that into the FSG system.
I see. Can I now just turn to some final topics, Mr. O'Neill? And first of all, if I could go back to your contemporaneous note, if that's possible, Danny. And it's really in relation to the paragraph numbered 7 at the bottom of the first page of your contemporaneous note. Thank you. And you'll see the paragraph numbered 7. What were you tasked with doing on your arrival? Reported to see you at Bowmore Road, should be approximately 010 hours. Spoke with DAC O'Loughlin and asked to implement a safety structure around the incident and report back with an appraisal. Yeah. Now, can you remember whether you reported back to DAC O'Loughlin with an appraisal, first of all?
I think he came to me first.
Okay. Can you remember when or how soon after the initial instruction was given that he approached you?
I think he was probably with AC Rowe when I first had a report back.
Okay. Now, Mr. Rowe didn't take over until 0244, so presumably the appraisal took place after that.
Yeah, I honestly, I can't remember. I mean, we had many discussions at the base of the tower, and periodically I went back to the CU to give updates on our progress, and that happened continually. So I can't put a time on the first time that happened, I'm afraid.
Okay, but is your evidence that you provided an update sometime between whenever it was 02:10:12 and 02:44?
I remember DAC O'Loughlin coming to see me and coming to see effectively what structure had been put in place. So now, on reflection, I think probably that happened before I saw AC Row.
Okay. This may be a lawyer's question, but is there a difference between providing an update and providing an appraisal?
No.
No. Turning to evacuation, you said that evacuation wasn't relevant to your particular expertise in USR. Now, if that's so, who are the experts within LFB to deal with evacuation of high-rise buildings? Where does the specialism sit?
I think the specialism sits within our fire safety engineers, who provide advice to building constructors on evacuation systems that are put in place. So with this being an old type building, you know, I think unfortunately we weren't given that opportunity, but there was no means of raising, you know, bearing in mind the time of the day, I imagine that many of the residents would have been asleep at the time. There was no way of raising everyone as a whole, other than banging on doors. And I think the expertise sits in new construction, and actually our advice to building, you know, companies, whatever, who are putting this stuff together, that they should include evacuation systems.
Following from your answer about the difficulties raising people given the time of night, did you consider using the building's intercom system as a means of...
I did not, no.
Would that have been a practicable means of communicating the change of advice, for example?
I don't know if it would have been or not. I wasn't familiar with that.
Given the difficulties about using the loud hailer and the importance of communicating the change of advice, was the intercom system something which should have been considered as a means of communication? I
think, as far as I was aware, we had crews inside that building from the ground floor up to, as I know for a fact, to be the 22nd floor at least. Therefore, I thought we had communication with the entire building. You know, it was only later on I learnt about the difficulties of accessing past certain points at certain times. So with the volume of crews that we had in that building, I was under the impression that we had access to raise that alarm.
Could I now go back to policy
Sorry,
6?
Mr. Kinnear, just to ensure that I've understood the question and answer correctly, when you refer to the intercom system, can you just make it clear what you're referring to?
Yes, it's the building intercom system that basically the buzzers in the lobby to communicate with each individual flat. Mm-hmm. And so what you'd be able to do, I suppose my essential point is this, that a priority could have been ringing the buzzer on the higher floors to alert them, for example, to the change of advice.
Yeah, I understand entirely what you're suggesting, and it's not something that I considered on that night.
Okay. Could I turn back to policy 633, and the reference, Danny, is LFB quadruple 01256 and page 16 within that policy. And looking at paragraph 7.66, says the IC should appoint safety officers as soon as practical to monitor conditions in the staircase. Now, you were obviously monitoring the exterior. The officers you appointed in terms of sectoral command were monitoring the exterior. Do you know who was monitoring the interior, i.e. the stairwell?
Yes, at that time it was Station Manager Nick Myatt had taken that responsibility. He was certainly looking at the conditions within that building and the welfare, if you like, of our crews that were recommitting, to make sure that they were capable of recommitting to that building.
Was he, you say you knew Nick Myatt was doing that role, was he reporting back to you with what he was finding?
Every time I went into that building and made contact, the conditions had changed. So there was that face-to-face system, but it was so dynamic that the bridgehead, as you know, moved more than once, and the stairwells became completely smoke logged, and then not so. So as it was so dynamic and moving so often, I don't think we had any consistent stream of information. They were monitoring and briefing as best they could.
Final question, Mr.
Yep.
O'Neill, and that's in relation to lifts. In circumstances where the fire lift is not functioning, what steps would you expect to be taken to disable the lift so residents wouldn't be able to use it?
Generally, are you saying?
Yes.
I understand the firefighter tried to secure a firefighting lift, and to my understanding, that wouldn't happen. That wouldn't be disabled. They would deal with the fire that was in the place of origin of that fire, and therefore, and I don't know how the lifts were used on that night. I know they weren't used in the way that they should have been, for our purposes. So, yeah, I'm not sure how to answer that really.
Okay. Mr. Neil, thank you very much for the evidence you've given today. It's very much appreciated.
And you've covered quite a lot of ground in your supplementaries. You're confident that you don't need a further 5 minutes to check that?
I am. Yes.
Right. Good. Well, Mr. Neil, thank you very much for coming to give your evidence. It's really valuable to us to hear accounts of people who were there at the time, and we're very grateful to you for coming along.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Now, you're free to go. If you'd like to go with the usher, she'll look after you. Yes, Mr. Kinnear, no.
So the next witness is Group Manager Nick Davis. So I might ask you to rise for 5 minutes just so that there can be the organisational changes.
Yes,
Thanks,
I'll
sir.
do that. And you can ask the usher to come and tell me as soon as you're ready.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Kinnear, now.
Sir, I misled everyone. In fact, the next witness is Watch Manager Dean Ricketts, and rather than send him back, may I call Watch Manager Dean Ricketts?
Yes, of course, thank you.
I swear by Almighty God
I swear by Almighty God
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ricketts. Yes, Mr. Kinnear.
Would you please confirm your name for the record?
Dean Ricketts.
And in front of you there is a blue folder, and if you turn to the first tab, you should find your statement dated the 23rd of July of this year. Is that right?
That's correct, sir.
And have you read that statement recently?
Yes, I have.
And you confirm its contents are true?
Yes, sir.
And you're content for that statement to stand as your evidence to this inquiry?
I am indeed, sir.
Mr. Ricketts, if any time you need a break, please say so. That's not a problem.
Thank you very much.
Secondly, if any time my questioning is unclear, please say so, and I'll rephrase.
Thank you very much.
Now, the first things I'd like to discuss with you, Mr. Ricketts, is just your background in the fire service. Is it right that at the time of the fire you were a watch manager B for Bertie, attached to Green Watch at North Kensington?
That's correct, sir.
And that you've been a firefighter for some 24 years, is that
That's
right?
correct,
The first substantive topic I'd like to discuss with you is the Fire Services Act 1947, Section 1D visits. At the risk of disrespect, you've been a firefighter long enough to have carried out 1D visits, is that
Yes,
right?
That's correct.
To what did the 1D visits involve?
Just familiarisation visits, really, sir. Going out and identifying risks on the station's ground and familiarising ourselves on those risks and those buildings and whatever else was a risk to the community.
Can you remember what was the trigger for a need for a visit under Section 1D?
I don't remember, sir, to be honest.
Okay. Do you remember being given a checklist such as a similar one to Appendix 1 behind Policy 633?
I don't recall that, sir. I wasn't an officer at the time.
Okay. What differences, if any, are there between the visits you used to conduct under 1D and the visits you now conduct under 72D?
Okay, so all the 1D visits were recorded on paper form, and the paper records were kept at in the fire station within the filing cabinets and with secure storage at the station. So everything was done on paper.
And so is your evidence the principal difference was the mode in which the information was recorded? The old system was on paper, the new system is
electronic.
online? Okay.
That's correct.
Turning to Policy 633, what's the trigger under the present system for a Section 72D visit?
We're either informed locally, possibly by a station manager or a fire safety team, or possibly the crews might identify whilst going about our business within the community that there may be a building or a new premises that's been erected, a new building that could possibly be visited by ourselves and useful for the gathering of information in case there is a fire or an incident at the property.
Okay. Danny, could I ask you to turn up Policy 633, LFB quadruple 01256? Mr. Ricketts, I assume you're familiar with this policy, is that fair?
That's correct, sir.
Could I ask you, Danny, to turn to page 1919 within that policy? And Mr. Ricketts, I'll just let you refresh your memory briefly there.
Okay.
Now, looking at Appendix 1, can you help us? Before carrying out a visit, would you refresh your memory and look at this list, at paragraph 1 of Appendix 1 of the policy?
To be honest, sir, I wouldn't make reference to the appendix. Just going on sort of like the experience of doing other 72D visits, we generally know, firefighters generally know, watch officers generally know the kind of risks and hazards to look out for. So generally, sort of like from experience, we would have generally a good idea of what to expect and what information to gather.
So you wouldn't use the bullet points here as a checklist?
I've never taken it out as a checklist.
Okay. Do you know whether anyone at North Ken has used this as a checklist for 72D?
I've never seen anybody take it out as a checklist.
What training, for example, in the 2 years before the fire, had you received in relation to Policy 633?
So the policy obviously is about high rise. The two things that the fire brigade have installed on us over the recent years is the importance in training on high rise buildings and obviously basement fires. So obviously we get a lot of training around high rise buildings. When we do incident command exercises, the focus is either on basement fires or high rise incidents.
And who provides that training to you in respect of high rise?
Babcock.
Have you received any, or have you yourself received any training in respect of high rise fires at the station?
Not at the station, no.
Have you delivered any?
Yes.
Yep. And what training have you delivered in relation to 633?
But basically, it's around the policy and the contents of the policy, and making sure that operational crews, so my crew in particular, are ready and know the procedures and what to expect when to go to a high-rise incident.
Have you ever had need to give training on how to conduct a Section 72D visit?
Sometimes officers underneath me, so the crew managers, they might need a sort of a little bit of prompting about what to look for in a premises. So if they were going to a premises that, say for example, I was familiar with, I might say to them, look out for a certain risk or a certain hazard.
So, and just for the avoidance of doubt, you wouldn't use Appendix 1 to assist any prompt to a crew manager who's in need of advice?
I've never made reference to it. So.
Okay. Have you received any training in how to conduct a Section 72D visit?
No, sir.
Have you received any training in relation to contingency planning relating to high-rise buildings?
No, sir.
Have you received any planning in relation to fire spread beyond the compartment of origin and the potential for multiple rescues?
Not multiple rescues, no.
Have you received any training regarding the logistical and physical demands on fire personnel conducting search and rescue in a high-rise building where there's been multiple compartmentation failure?
Sorry, just repeat the question?
Yeah, sure. Have you received any training on the logistical and physical demands on firefighters who are conducting search and rescues in respect to multiple FSGs in a high-rise building?
No, I don't think so, sir.
Okay. Have you received any training on how to deal with single staircases in high-rise buildings for the purposes of firefighting or effecting rescues?
Not specifically single staircases, no.
Could I ask Danny to turn up policy 800, which is at LFB quadruple 0705. Whilst we're waiting for that, obviously policy 800 deals with the management of operational risk information. Is that policy something in relation to which you've received training?
I don't believe so, no.
Have you given any training on the management of operational risk information?
May have discussed it at station level. No formal training as such.
Okay. So discussed, don't want to put words in your mouth, the impression you're giving it was an informal level?
Just the contents of the policy.
Okay. Can you help us? What role does the station manager have in reviewing the information collated for the purposes of a Section 72D visit?
So if I was to go out and do a 72D visit and record all the information on the operational risk database, once that information is inputted, then I submit it for data quality checks.
Okay. And do you know how a station manager ensures that the information is correctly entered onto the ORD?
No, I don't.
Okay. Can you help us, to what extent does the information gathered during the course of a Section 72D visit inform the predetermined attendance?
Sorry, repeat the question, sir.
How does the information gathered during the course of a Section 72D visit inform assessment of the predetermined attendance?
The predetermined attendance assessment has already been completed for high rises, so I'd have no input on that.
Could we look paragraph 3.3 within policy 800? I'll let you just refresh your memory there, Mr. Ricketts.
Well, it's quite a long section. It's just 3.3.
3.3, sir.
Yeah.
Yep. Mr. Ricketts, looking at the 5 bullet points there, it looks as if the ORD informs the PDA section that's dealt with at the 3rd bullet point. Is that your experience, that information from the ORD is fed through to the PDA?
To be honest, so once I've submitted it, completed it and submitted it, I don't have any input or any notification of it unless it gets rejected and comes back to my work queue.
Could I ask you next some questions about cladding itself? What training have you had on the particular dangers of cladding fires on high-rise buildings?
None, sir.
Okay. Were you aware of the Shepherd's Court fire from August 2016?
Yes, sir.
What's your understanding of the principal lessons that were learnt arising out of Shepherd's Court?
I think it was just to be aware of the panels that were involved in the fire there. So, as far as I believe, there was some kind of UVPC panel below the window, and the fire breached the compartment and spread up to the panels and the UVPC windows above it.
But you received no specific training on the range of cladding materials that were being applied to high-rise buildings in London?
Not that I can recall, sir, no.
Okay. Can you help us looking at UPVC windows? To what extent will a Section 72D visit look at the risk posed by UPVC windows for fire spread, for example?
I wouldn't particularly look at that and see that as a risk.
And why not?
It's just incorporated into the building design.
Okay. Now, Mr. Ricketts, can I now turn to Grenfell-specific questions? Now, as I understand it, you had your first Section 72D visit in 2017. Now, could I ask Danny to turn to the ORD itself, which is at LFB quadruple 03116. And if I could ask you, Danny, to amplify the entry for the 15th of February 2017, the date's on the far right-hand column. Now, I think in your witness statement, Mr. Ricketts, you say that that date is in fact an error and the correct date of the visit was the 27th of March of 2017. Is that correct?
I recall my visit on the 27th of March, so that's correct. Yeah.
Are you able to help us with an explanation of the error in relation to the date?
It's a little bit confusing, to be honest, sir, but I think possibly I might have opened up the appointment and left it in the station diary. Was too busy on the day, and I've moved the appointment. But for some reason, it's still shown as it recorded on the 15th of February. But I know that not to be the case, my visit, because one of the firefighters who accompanied me on the visit was on leave on that day, so I can be pretty positive that the visit was on the 27th of February.
Thank you.
That's also confirmed in an email that I sent to the TMO on the same day, confirming I'd done the visit earlier that day.
Thank you. Now, is it right that the purpose of your visit was as set out at page 4 of your witness statement, and it's the 5th paragraph from the top, and I can quote it for you if that helps. This was a visit, so the 5th paragraph from the top, this was a visit for crews and in particular officers, so that basic information could be gathered and recorded on the operational risk database and a tactical plan drawn up and accessed via the mobile data terminal, which is carried on all frontline operational appliances. Mr. Ricketts, when I refer to the statement, Danny very helpfully flags it up on the screen, so it may be easier for you to look at it either on the little screen next to you or the big screen by your shoulder.
Okay, thank you.
Now, looking at that extract, why do you say in particular officers? You say this was a visit for crews and in particular officers.
It's the officers who'll be making the decisions if they turn up at an incident.
So it's officers who are making the decision to...
Formulate a plan.
Okay. Had you visited the tower before?
No, sir, not that I can recall.
Before you attended the tower on the 27th of March 2017, did you review the ORD?
Yes, sir, I would have done.
Would you have noted any outstanding actions?
To be honest, sir, possibly, but I can't remember that I noted any. I do recall having a conversation with other officers in the office before I went about Grenfell Tower.
And can you recall, did you prompt that conversation or did they prompt it?
Well, as it's come up in the diary, I've asked about Grenfell Tower because I'd only been at North Kensington for a few months. I'd asked about Grenfell Tower in particular, and they told me that the crews had done sort of like lots of visits, not only 72D visits, but sort of lots of informal visits to the tower to familiarise themselves with the construction work that was going on, because there was an issue with the dry riser and the movement of the dry riser.
Now, were you aware of the nature and scale of the refurbishment as a result of those conversations with fellow officers?
I was informed that it was a major refurbishment.
Given the scale of the refurbishment, was one of the further purposes of the visit to ensure that all the information on the ORD was correct?
To be honest, for me it was a familiarisation visit because I was new to North Kensington, just to get an understanding of the building and the scale and the scope of the actual sort of like the whole estate, the Lancaster West estate.
But if I might press you, given the nature and scale of the refurbishment, was the Section 72D visit in March 2017, that provided you with an opportunity to review the entirety of the ORD, didn't it? To check it was correct.
It would have done.
Did you view it with that purpose in mind or not?
Not to view the entirety of it because it was a big building.
Given what your understanding was of the purpose of the particular visit in March 2017, did you think, given the scale of the refurbishment, you'd have to book a further Section 72D that reviewed the accuracy of the ORD in more detail?
That didn't come into my thoughts, so no.
Could I go back to the ORD, in particular page 1? Thanks, Danny. And if I could, looking at the section under the heading Earlier Visit Comments, and it's the 5th entry from the top, dated 10th of May 2016. And you'll see there in the left-hand column, it says plans are required for MDT. Now, first of all, did you notice this entry when you reviewed the ORD before your March visit?
I can't remember if I noted it, certainly.
If you had noted it, would you have sought plans?
Well, it says above it, image of building added to plans.
We'll come on to that later, but do you think an image of a building is the same as a plan?
No, sir, they can be different, but after that, after it says image of building added to plans, then it's gone through the quality assurance process.
Did you check with Mr. Davis as to what he precisely had in mind when he said plans are required?
No, because it's been accepted by Station Manager Davis, I thought that was acceptable.
Now, the second question arising out of that is, would it be fair to assume that you didn't check up with the TMO whether they had any plans of the building for the purposes of the MDT? Did you check with the TMO?
Sorry, say the question again?
Yeah. Did you check with the TMO whether they had any plans of the building that could be used for the purposes of the ORD?
Well, on the visit, obviously I identified that there was no premises information box and there was no plans available to us. If there had been a premises information box, then I may have possibly been able to use those plans and took copies of those plans to use.
Now, what purpose do the plans fill for the purpose of the ORD? Why do you need them?
Well, obviously they're part of the tactical plan for the incident commanders to make their decisions on what to do.
And what type of plan do you require? Do you need floor plans?
It all depends what's required, but
Looking at a high-rise building.
Okay, so on a simple high-rise building, the floor plans are normally sort of like the same as they go up. So possibly you could have just had one plan of a floor layout.
And would that be supplemented with detail of the flat numbering on each floor as you went up?
I wouldn't imagine so, no, because you would have got the floor numbering from sort of other sources of information.
Would you require anything as detailed as architectural drawings?
No.
Now, if we could look further on at further entries in the ORD, and if I could ask Danny to go to page 4 of the ORD, and if I could look at the top section underneath tactical plan and including operational contingency plan. Now, can you explain to us what you'd expect to find under the heading tactical plan in the ORD?
Everything else what's underneath the ORD, in the ORD, underneath that section.
Okay.
That's the tactical plan.
So looking at the next heading, which is the operational contingency plan, the date is the 30th of October 2009. Would you have expected an updated operational contingency plan to be in place given the nature and scale of the refurbishment?
So I think that's just the date when the operational contingency plan was started, when it was uploaded onto the ORD.
Would you expected, you see there version 1, that indicates that it wasn't updated thereafter. Is that a fair reading of that entry?
No.
So you're saying there were further versions after the 30th of October 2009?
Everything that comes after that, the operational contingency plan is the en route considerations and the tactical plan, which is everything else covered within the ORD.
Okay. Could we turn to page 4? Sorry, we're on page 4, going further down. If Nick could, sorry, Dan, if you could come out of that. And then,
so can I just add something to that?
Yes.
Every ORD entry starts with that operational contingency plan, with a plan name of the name of the building, then a date when it was created onto the ORD. There's nothing else to go in that box. Every ORD entry on the fire brigade system starts with that operational contingency plan with the name and the date.
Okay. But if it's updated, would you expect the version number to be updated? Presumably.
Well, no, because the plan is a continual plan and then it's updated. So it's not been taken off the system and put on as a new system. Perhaps if that was the case, then maybe it'd be plan number 2.
Okay.
But it stays on the operational risk database.
Can I just ask, am I right in thinking it's the station manager who's responsible for, or has overall responsible for the ORD?
It's the station manager that goes through the data quality process.
Yeah, so in a sense he checks that it
He checks that
contains
the
what it should contain.
That's correct. He or she will check whether the contents of the ORD are sufficiently adequate.
So it may be that some of these questions the station manager might be better able to answer than you.
I'm happy to try to answer them.
Oh, I'm sure you are, yes, because I just don't want you to be put in an unfair position, you see.
No, thank you.
Yeah. Yes, go on, Mr. Kinney.
Let's just see if Danny could come out of that particular expansion. If we just look under site details, you see site profile, the first box, high-rise block of flats of 20 floors. Were you able to check whether the identification of 20 floors was correct or not on your visit?
No, I didn't, sir, because I was focused on other parts of the building. The 20 floors was only explained to me after. Obviously, it was still a building of 23 floors, but before the refurbishment of the building, it was 20 residential floors starting from the 4th floor.
And when you say after, do you mean after the fire or after?
Forgive me. So pre the refurbishment, there was 20 levels of flooring, which started at the 4th floor. So the 23rd floor was in fact called the 20th floor.
Okay. Could I, Danny, if you could go out of that expansion, and if we go on to the on-site actions, which I think is over the page, and emergency contacts, and you see at the bottom of page 5, the emergency contacts there. Did you ask who should be the specified emergency contacts on your visit?
No, I didn't. I overlooked that.
And did you check whether for example, the actual 2 identified individuals, did you check whether they were permanent employees of the TMO or who they were generally?
No, I didn't. As I was being shown around by the housing officer, she gave me a compliment slip with details of the TMO. To be fair, I should have updated that and put the TMO records on there.
Later on in your witness statement, you talk about discussions you had with Nicky Bartholomew and Janice Ray about sorting out the premises information box. Was there one, and where was it? Would you have specified them under the emergency contacts box or not?
Possibly. I mean, they're always useful numbers, so they would have been daytime telephone numbers. So obviously, if there was an incident during the daytime, then obviously they would have been contactable. So they would have been useful.
Okay. Can you help us? When would you expect out-of-date information to be picked up? Would you expect it to be picked up in individual Section 72D visits, or when?
No, to be fair, it's the responsibility of the conducting officer.
And the conducting officer would be you?
That's correct, sir.
Given that you had a limited purpose, or your understanding was the focus of the Section 72D visit you carried out in March was limited, what opportunity would you have to check all the information in the ORD during the course of that visit?
Well, as you go through the visit, obviously you pick up points as you go through, and then when you get back to the station and you update those records, then you amend as necessary.
And on the visit you carried out on the 27th of March, can you help us where in the tower you went?
Okay, so the main focus that I focused on was the basement, because it hadn't been identified before in any of the previous ORD visits, and it hadn't been identified in any of the 11D visit records that were held on the station. The main focus of my visit, I thought, was important to recognise that there was a big basement there, and so I concentrated most of my efforts on the basement area.
One of the points you mention in your witness statement, it's page 4, and it's the penultimate paragraph on that page. You describe the fact you identified dry rather than wet risers. It's the penultimate paragraph, Danny. And you say, I also noticed the tower had a dry riser, not a wet riser. This surprised me, considering the vast renovation works that have been carried out on the tower, and I later raised this point with Station Manager Davis. Can you help us? Why did it concern you in the first place?
Just because of the considerable amount of money that obviously been spent on the tower, and to the extent of the refurbishment, I was and sort of taking a rough guess at the height of the building. I wasn't sure whether it should have been upgraded to a wet riser, and whether that was part of the building regulation process.
Did you raise the nature of the riser with either Nicky Bartholomew or Janice Ray? Can you remember?
No. To be fair, I never spoke to Janice Ray. I only sort of contacted her via email. But Nicky Bartholomew I spoke to on the 27th of March.
Were you aware of any advice that the TMO had sought in relation to the nature of the riser to be fitted?
No, sir.
No. And you say, I later raised this point to Station Manager Nick Davis. Can you remember precisely when you raised it with him?
I can't remember the exact date. It may have been the day that I carried out the visit, but I remember it was in the station office at North Kensington, and I asked him about whether it should have been upgraded due to the vast works that had been carried on there. So I did. I raised it with him and said, should it have been upgraded to a wet riser?
What was his response?
He was unsure, but his answer to me, I think, was something along the lines of that it must have gone through fire engineering, so that they would be the ones to know.
Okay. Did you know whether he did anything further to investigate the position?
I don't know, sir.
Okay. Did you have any concerns regarding the location of the riser inlets? Let's say they were at the far end of the lobbies away from the stairwell.
There'd be the dry riser outlets. No, I didn't go up in the tower, sir. So as I say, the main focus of my visit was down in the basement.
Okay. One of the points you raise in your witness statement is the absence of a premises information box. Is that right?
That's correct, sir.
Now, can you help us? What's the purpose of a premises information box?
The premises information box will hold risk-critical information, which is useful to the fire brigade in attendance at an incident. So it might have details of possibly an evacuation plan. It might hold details of residents. It might hold details of I think I've put it in my statement, might hold details of instructions how to use a smoke extraction system, and it might hold plans to the building.
In your experience, nearly a quarter of a century, do high-rise residential buildings usually have a premises information box present?
Some do. My experience, because before I come to North Kensington, I was based at Fulham. I was watch manager A at Fulham. And Hammersmith and Fulham, from my experience, the high-rises I went to, the majority of them had premises information boxes.
They had them?
From my experience of going to high-rise premises at Hammersmith and Fulham, most of them had them, and other properties as well. So there was a high degree of, when I went on visits within Hammersmith and Fulham, there was more premises information boxes to be found. So when I went to North Kensington, as I say, I'd only been there for a short time. When I went to Grenfell, I was surprised that there wasn't one. Some of the accompanying tower blocks around Grenfell Tower, such as Stebbins, Norland, and Pointer House, in the shadows of Grenfell Tower, they're also, I think, 23 or 24 floor buildings. They've got premises information box, but they're managed by Hammersmith and Fulham.
Dealing with your Fulham experience first, would the premises information boxes there invariably contain evacuation plans?
I couldn't tell you that, sir.
From what you know now of the neighbouring blocks to Grenfell, did their premises information boxes contain evacuation plans?
I couldn't tell you specifics of individual ones, sir.
Okay. Now, please correct me if I'm wrong, but is it right that you raised the absence of the premises information box with Nikki Bartholomew?
I mentioned it to Nikki Bartholomew in the housing office.
And she couldn't help you, is the upshot?
No, exactly so, yeah.
And Nikki Bartholomew gave you Janice Ray's telephone number, is that right?
That's correct. She wrote a telephone number on a compliment slip, which I've retained. It's got her telephone number, Janice Ray's telephone number, and her email address, and Nikki Bartholomew also put her telephone number and contact details on it as well.
And were you able to make contact with Janice Ray?
To the best of my recollection, I didn't speak to Janice Ray. When I got back to the fire station, I telephoned the number that I was given, and I believe I spoke to Adrian Bowman.
And what was the upshot of that conversation?
I'll be perfectly honest, I can't remember the conversation, but it would have, to the best of my knowledge, it would have only been about the premises information box.
Is it fair to assume that if you've been told that there was one and its location, you would have recorded that in the ORD?
Yes, sir, I would have.
If I could ask you to go back to the ORD, Danny, and it's page 4 of the ORD, so that's LFB quadruple 0 3116 and page 4. Mr. Ricketts, you'll see in the very last box at the bottom of this page under premises information box, PIB, is there a PIB at this address? And the entry is the word false. Can you remember, did you insert that word?
I think it was already on there, to be fair.
Did you give any advice to the TMO that there ought to be a premises information box at the premises, given your experience in Fulham, for example?
I had a discussion with Nikki Bartholomew about it, but she didn't know much about it at all, so I didn't think it was worth pursuing. She just sort of said to me, the best person to speak to is Janice Ray.
Did you get much further joy from Adrian Bowman, for example?
No, I've got nothing back. No.
Okay. And did you contact Janice Ray after you'd completed your visit to chase up the issue of the premises information box?
Not regarding the premises information box.
Okay. Did you chase her up on other aspects of the Section 72D visit?
Not on the 72D visit, no.
Okay. Now, in relation to the location and function of the firefighting lift, what was your understanding of the nature of the lift that had been installed at Grenfell?
Well,
Was it an up-to-date firefighter lift as opposed to a fireman's lift?
I think it was the old type, the old fireman's lift.
Did you ascertain for yourself which type of lift it was?
I didn't know. One of my firefighters went to check it, but it was too busy, so they couldn't check the functionality of the lift. But they just come back and told me that there were fireman's lift controls there.
Given that you weren't able to carry out a test because the volume of people present in the tower, I think it was at lunchtime or thereabouts, was
That's correct, yeah.
the visit. Could you test the key to see if firefighter control could be acquired? Would that be a...
Well, if we tested the key, then obviously we would have gained control of the lift. So there was no purpose in doing that because there were too many people about.
Okay. Could you have rescheduled a visit for a less busy time when you could have tested the lift to test whether it could be brought under control?
That's a possibility, so yeah.
What would normally happen where you've had a high-rise building refurbished? you haven't been able to test the lift to see whether it can be brought under control. What would you normally do? Would you chase up a further Section 72D visit to test all these outstanding matters?
To be honest, no, because of the volume of 72D visits that we do, it's hard to schedule in sort of like further 72D visits.
I should have asked you that earlier on. Can you give us an idea of the volume of visits you're required to carry out, whether during the week or during a month? Can you give us an idea?
So I can tell you exactly how many visits we've got at North Kensington. So we have what's called a master schedule, and that details all the 72D visits. So we've got 98 72D visits to conduct at North Kensington. 25 of those are high-rise buildings.
And how do you prioritise those visits?
It depends on the frequency of the visit required and the level of risk.
Now, the next topic, going back to your statement, you say at the final bullet point on page 7 that you'd added comments to the ORD regarding restricted access and limitation for appliances, and you put appliance access difficulties there. Could I ask Danny to take us back to the ORD and page 5 of the ORD? And looking at the second box from the top under the heading Site Access. Were these the entries you inputted into the ORD following your visit in March 2017?
I believe so.
If I can ask Danny to come out of that expansion and go down to the third section on that page, en route considerations. And the first entry there says Grenfell Road is a covered area TL Limited. For the lay people here, can you explain what you mean is a covered area TL Limited there?
Well, the covered area is the end of the walkway to the finger blocks of the estate.
And
so the whole of the estate, so Hurst Way, the Hurst Way, Testerton, and the other finger blocks, they're all linked on the end by a walkway. So as you drive down, the walkway is a sort of like covered area, so you drive into it.
So my purpose in asking the question was to see whether the detail of your answer, is that something that ought to have been inputted in the first entry under en route considerations?
You say, is it?
No, could it? Or should it, rather? Should the detail you've just given me have been put to amplify the information of the first entry there?
The order of the list of that?
No, we're just looking at the first entry. Could that entry have been made more detailed with the detail you've just given me in your answer?
If you overcomplicate the ORD, then there's too much information to take in. But that's a quick, brief sort of like indication to oncoming appliances, or even the TL driver themselves, or the appliance commander or the turntable ladder. That's an indication straight away that there could be problems.
When you were carrying out the Section 72D visit, did you consider where an aerial appliance could be sited safely?
Well, I think I've put somewhere on the ORD about the access could be somewhere else. Can we examine the rest of the ORD?
Danny, if you can de-amplify this, are you thinking about the access sections further up? I'll let you read that, just to refresh your memory.
Okay, so okay, perhaps I'm getting confused with my actual statement.
Don't worry. Looking at the level of detail you put into the ORD, would you have put information such as you could only cite aerials on particular aspects of the tower? Would you put that level of detail in the ORD?
Possibly, but then it would be dependent on circumstances. It may well just be for the officer in charge of the incident, the first incident commander, to decide that and make that plan.
Before you carried out the Section 72D visit, were you aware of any access-related issues raised by residents of Grenfell Tower?
No, sir.
The next topic I'd like to discuss with you is the location and access to electricity and gas intakes. And you say in your statement, it may be useful to go back to it, page 5, and it's 3 paragraphs from the bottom of that page. You say this. The TMO maintenance contractor asked if there were any particular areas that I would be interested in seeing. I replied by stating that I would very much like to see the service intakes for gas and electricity. These would be useful, as it could be a requirement to isolate these services in the event of a fire. Can you help us, on the basis of your experience, why those particular things are priorities?
They're priorities in any fire, not just high-rise fires, but any fire at all. One of the first things we try and do is isolate the gas and electricity, so they don't become a hazard to firefighters whilst they're firefighting, and also sort of if gas was escaping, and obviously that would make the fire more dangerous.
Are these matters that are so basic you don't require training, or you are nonetheless provided training in relation to the dangers or the requirement to locate and isolate gas and electricity?
I think through our incident command training, it's one of the things that's installed in us that we look for the service intakes and to isolate the gas and the electricity at the earliest convenience.
Are firefighters able to isolate gas and electricity supply, or do you need the assistance of the relevant utility company?
Normally, the gas is normally just a shut-off valve, and electricity is just a main fuse.
Okay. Again, apologies for jumping around documents, Mr. Ricketts. If I could go back to the ORD and page 3 of the ORD, and at the bottom of that page, under hazard summary, thank you, Danny. You see there, the ORD gives a description of the location and access. On the night of the fire, some time was taken to obtain the key. Would it have assisted to have provided detail regarding the arrangements necessary to obtain the master key there?
Every frontline appliance carries a girder master key.
Okay. And so you didn't need to spell it out?
No.
Can I ask you to turn to the top of page 6 of your witness statement, and it's the first paragraph, and you say there that I was further shown the smoke extraction controls, the fire alarm panel, and it was explained to me how the entry system works with a drop key, which releases the main entrance door for 90 seconds. Now, in relation to the smoke extraction controls, was it the TMO's maintenance contractor who showed you those controls?
It was either the maintenance contractor or it was Nicky Bartholomew who explained to us how it works.
Okay. Had you picked up that the LFB didn't have any instructions regarding the use of those controls? I.e. there were none referred to in the ORD.
What, of the door controls?
Yes, or controls for the operator, talking generically about controls for the operation of the smoke ventilation system.
Okay, sorry, I thought you were talking about the door control.
Apologies, I was talking about the smoke extraction controls.
Put the question again, I think.
I think that may be easy. The question, in relation to the smoke extraction controls, first of all, I asked you who told you about it, and the next question is, had you picked up that the LFB had no instructions regarding the use of the smoke extraction controls?
No, I didn't know that the LFB didn't have any instructions for it. Well, certainly we never at station level. I don't know whether the LFB in general had any details of it. So fire safety might have been given some instructions about it.
But would you have expected instructions for use to have been part of the ORD?
They're useful if they're provided to us. But if they're not provided to us, then obviously they're of no use. But operationally, if there's smoke extraction systems in place, then the first incident commander, if they needed to use those or they had been activated, then you would call on a fire safety officer to assist you with those controls.
Did you ask for instructions from the TMO maintenance contractor or Nicky Bartholomew?
I didn't know.
No. Were you shown?
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Mr. Cliff. We've been running for a best part of an hour. I think I just should check with Mr. Ricketts. Are you comfortable carrying on, or do you feel you need a break?
No, I'm fine, sir.
You're okay. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes,
Thanks, sir. Were you shown how to use the controls, or did you simply note the existence of the smoke extraction controls?
Exactly, just note the existence of it.
Okay. Was any explanation given to you how the system worked and its limitations?
No, sir.
No. Did you ask for such an explanation?
No, sir.
May I ask why you wouldn't press the TMO for that information?
Well, I didn't press the TMO for that information because as a level 1 incident commander, that would be beyond me to sort of know how to expect how to use those controls, and we're always sort of like informed if we need to, use those controls. Then to request the attendance of a fire safety advisor to assist us in those operations.
Okay. I'm now going to ask you about the drop key system.
Okay.
Now, the ORD noted in the second entry under the heading Site Access, and we can go back to it if you'd like, that the fireman's drop lift key operated the main entrance door and all internal doors for 90 seconds. And if we go to page 5 of the ORD, just so you can see the precise entry. And you see Site Access, the second box from the top,
Okay.
and then the second entry under the heading Site Access. Now, my question is this: is 90 seconds sufficient to allow a crew to access the building?
Yes.
Yeah. And is that a normal time period you've encountered in your experience?
I've never encountered a time on it. Normally, it just opens it.
Okay.
So that's a benefit to us if it opens for 90 seconds.
If I can now turn to the assessment of other hazards at the tower that you identified on your visit, to what extent did you consider the likelihood and impact of any fire spread beyond a compartment of origin?
The likelihood of it.
For the purposes of the Section 72D visit, did you consider the likelihood and impact of any fire spread beyond the compartment of origin?
No, I didn't consider that. No, I mean it's always it's always in your mind that there may be fire spread, to possibly the flat above. If it breaks out of the compartment, then obviously there's a potential for the flames to rise upwards and catch light to the flat above. So, for example, if there was a window open, or if we had UVPC windows, for example, then there's always that possibility. So that's always in your mind, and you always plan for those sort of things. But nothing specifically out of the ordinary that we wouldn't normally be planning and thinking about.
And the staircase itself, you identified that there was a single staircase.
I was informed it was a single staircase. Yeah.
Did you inspect the
I
staircase?
didn't go up the staircase. No.
Okay. Is there a reason why, when you're attending a recently refurbished high-rise residential building, you didn't go inspect the staircase to check its dimensions, etc.?
So all my crews on my watch and all the other crews at North Kensington are so familiar with Grenfell Tower. Once I identified that there was this huge vast basement down underneath which hadn't been picked up on the ORD or any of the other fire safety records, so I prioritised on going down to the basement and inspecting the basement, so I didn't go up the staircase.
Okay. And presumably flowing from that, you wouldn't have asked the TMO for confirmation of the precise number of residents, and for example those residents who suffered from vulnerability or disability?
Well, with regards to the number of residents, I think that's already recorded on the ORD. But as to what else you're saying, we wouldn't inquire into those things.
Did you ask for confirmation of the number of residents in the tower when you carried out your Section 72D?
No, I didn't. I just took it for granted. What was on the ORD.
Danny, could I ask you to put the ORD back up on the screens, please? And it's page 4. And Mr. Ricketts, if I could ask you to look, it's 3 boxes up from the bottom of the page under the heading Communications. And there is an entry which says handheld radio, good comms in sub-basement, channel 1. Can you explain to us how you satisfy yourself that communications are, quotes, good, close quotes?
Well, whilst we were doing the visit down sort of in the basement, so my fire appliance was parked under the covered walkway. I was in constant communication on channel 1 with the driver of that appliance.
And you're satisfied they were good, as you record there?
I had absolutely no communication problems at all.
Okay. And did you test communications up the tower, further up the tower?
As I say, I didn't go up the tower, so.
Would you ever test communications using a Barry radio headset to, for example, send a firefighter further up the tower and you remain in the basement?
The headsets are on the BA sets. So
that's what I mean.
Yeah.
Would you have put a firefighter in a BA set with the Barry headset, sent him up the tower to test how effective communications were further up?
No.
Okay. Now, the next subject I'd like to discuss with you is updating the ORD. Can you explain for us what the relationship is between the ORD and the premises risk assessment? If it's a question that's better answered by Group Manager Davis, please say so.
Well, I'll try and answer it. So the information that we've just been going through in that document, that's the information that should be updated and checked. And then in the station diary, it gives you another box on the top with a link to the premises risk assessment matrix.
And looking at the factors that are relevant to the premises risk assessment, clearly how many people are in the building is a relevant factor. Would you agree?
Yes, sir.
And from what you're saying, that's not information that you'd ordinarily check on a Section 72D visit. Is that a fair way to summarise your evidence?
Well, if there was nothing in the operational risk database already, then I would check that and ask for that. But there was already a figure in there which I assumed was a reasonable figure.
And so you'd assume that would be correct?
I mean, I can take a good calculated guess. You know, going on experience about how many people would be in a tower block, I'd say that was a good. I'd think to say that was a good and accurate number.
Okay. Did you ask any questions about sort of building materials that had been used as part of the refurbishment on your visit?
No.
That's a matter that would be relevant to the assessment of risk for the purpose of the premises risk assessment, wouldn't it?
Possibly, but to me, the building's just undergone a major refurbishment. I wouldn't have seen that the cladding to be a risk. I would have had faith in the building controls process and hopefully that it wouldn't provide a risk.
Would you agree that with the general proposition that if the information relevant to a building is not kept updated in the ORD, then the premises risk assessment would similarly be outdated and inaccurate?
Well, it's reviewed on completion of the ORD. So once the ORD is completed in a station diary, then the premises risk assessment is reviewed.
But if the ORD hasn't looked at all relevant circumstances, for example, number of people in the building, nature of building materials used as part of that building, there's a risk of inaccuracy, isn't there, both in the ORD and in the premises risk assessment?
I'm not sure what points you're looking at the premises risk assessment.
Were you involved?
Well, I think Mr. Kinnear's point is that if you've got information that's missing from the ORD or inaccurate in the ORD, it will, to that extent, render the premises risk assessment defective. Is that a fair comment or not?
Okay, but I wouldn't complete the ORD knowingly that there was missing information.
No, but if it transpired that there was something missing or wrong, it could affect the.
Then it could. I see what you're saying. It could.
Yeah.
It could. The accuracy of the premises risk assessment could be affected.
Yeah.
Okay, I accept that.
Yeah.
And would you have had any involvement in compiling entries and compiling information relevant to the premises risk assessment, or did you leave that? Was that the responsibility of others?
No, that's the responsibility of the completing watch officer.
Okay. And so ultimately is responsible for the content of the premises risk assessment. Is it the station manager ultimately?
Ultimately, it's the watch officer completing. So on this occasion, it was me.
Could I now turn to a different topic, and that's the notice of fire safety deficiencies dated November 2016. And if I could ask Danny to put up document TMO 00832135. Now, Mr. Ricketts, I'll just let you scan that. I think.
Well, can you read it?
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
Thank you.
All right, good.
I was just about to say that, actually, if Danny could de-amplify for a moment and just amplify the date, which is the 17th of November in the top right-hand corner, 2016.
Okay,
Now, I think you joined North Ken in November 2016, is that right?
that's correct, sir.
And can you remember when in November you joined?
The 3rd of November.
Do you remember? I'll let you, having mindful of the dates, I'll ask Danny to re-amplify the substance of that letter just so you can refresh your memory.
Sorry, you say refresh my memory?
Or to read it, I should say. It's a fair point.
Okay, it's quite a long letter.
It is a long letter. My first point is a quick one. Do you remember? Have you seen this before?
No, sir.
Fine. Could I ask you, Danny, to turn to page 5 and 6. Now, this is a schedule of the fire safety audit observations. Can you help us? Where there is a notice of fire safety deficiencies served by what was then LFB on an individual, would the substance of the deficiencies, would that be fed into the ORD at any stage?
I've never seen a form like that, sir.
I think that my question is a more general one. Would the information contained in the schedule of fire safety audit observations, would that information be fed into the ORD at any stage?
Not unless a specific fire safety officer was to contact you directly and sort of give you that information.
So before you went off on your Section 72D visit in March 2017, you were unaware of the content of this schedule. Is that a fair way to summarise your evidence?
No one's given me any information about Grenfell Tower.
Okay. The final topic for now that I'd like to discuss with you, Mr. Ricketts, is the aborted training exercise in May 2017. First of all, can you help us? Why was the tower chosen for the exercise?
So it was chosen because we're always looking for outside venues to practice our sort of like procedures. And on inspection of the basement of Grenfell Tower, and identified that it would have been a useful training venue to carry out an exercise. I was asked to carry out a 4-pump exercise and look for a venue to carry out that. So.
And was it the LFB who wanted Grenfell Tower? Did the TMO suggest Grenfell as being
No, I chose it.
You chose it. During the course of your visit on the 27th of March, did you meet any residents? Do you remember meeting any residents?
I can't remember, sir. I think the only person spoke to one of them just to get some directions as to where the housing office was, but I didn't speak to anyone in particular about anything specific.
No conversations with anyone in any?
No, sir.
Okay. Can you remember, was a fee payable by the LFB for using Grenfell Tower for the purposes of a training exercise?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Okay. One question which has arisen is why focus on the basement for the purposes of the exercise as opposed to multiple floors, for example?
Okay, well, as I said earlier, one of the two focuses that we train on is high rises and basements. And the basement there was quite a vast basement with a long concrete staircase going down, and I just thought it was an excellent opportunity to carry out some of our procedures and test crews sort of going into a really difficult sort of like situation, really difficult sort of like environment. So that's why I chose the basement.
Given it was a residential building, wouldn't there be an additional benefit to practice drill over multiple floors and not just confined to the basement?
I think there was a previous drill in 2015, I think it was, at Grenfell Tower. I don't get told what exercises or what drills to carry out. I'm just told to carry out a 4-pump exercise. Okay. I'm given the instructions by a establishing performance team, sort of like, so that they tell me I have to carry out and lead a 4-pump exercise. So I gathered information to carry out that 4-pump exercise.
And can you remember whether the exercise that was due to be carried out in May 2017 would have involved Red Watch or What Watch at North Cairn?
No, it was booked for June 2017, and it would have been my watch.
Your watch?
Green Watch.
Sorry, the discussions were in May. I realise it was booked for the 8th of June, but yeah, the discussions were in it. So it was your watch?
It was my watch.
Okay.
So it would have been 2 appliances from my station plus 2 others from other stations.
Okay. Now, looking at its cancellation, it appears as if it was cancelled because of a competing tabletop exercise. Is that a fair way of putting it? That's
correct, sir. Yeah, Wormwood Scrubs Prison.
And I suppose my blunt question is, why does the prison take precedence over the high-rise building?
You'll have to ask the group manager who cancelled the exercise.
Okay. Mr. Ricketts, you'll be pleased to know that for the moment, those are all the questions I have. So I realise we're approaching sort of 1 o'clock, but it might be easy if we allow maybe 5 minutes for me to review the position now. if there are any supplementals, I can put them to Mr. Ricketts, and then he can be released sooner rather than
So
later.
you'd like to finish your evidence this morning, which Mr. Ricketts, I imagine.
Your convenience, sir.
Yes, well, that's good of you. But, well, we'll rise until 5 to 1 to give Mr. Kinnear a chance to see if there are any more questions. And then, although it may take us a little bit beyond our normal 1 o'clock stopping time, I think we can get you out before lunch.
Much
All right?
appreciated.
So would you like to go with the usher now? And please don't talk to anyone about your evidence while you're out of the room. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
All right, 5 to 1, all right, Mr. Kinnear?
Thanks, sir.
Yes. Thank you. Yes, Mr. Kinnear.
Some very brief supplementals with your
questions,
permission,
yes.
sir.
Yeah. Well, Mr. Ricketts, I think a few more questions.
Thank you.
Yes, Mr.
Mr. Ricketts,
Yeah.
you're all right, you?
Yeah.
First of all, if I can go back to access, can you remember whether you checked on your visit whether the removable bollards were in fact removable on the access way to Grenfell Tower? Can you remember?
I didn't check them, sir. No.
Okay. Now, we were discussing the smoke ventilation system, and in your answer you said you'd expect that in the event of an incident, please shout if I summarise this incorrectly, the incident commander would have or would ask for the assistance of a fire safety officer in terms of the operation. Is that a fair summary of your evidence, first of all?
Correct, yeah.
Will that always be the case that a fire safety officer would be required to assist the incident commander operate equipment such as a smoke ventilation system?
I think that would be the expectation of an incident commander, yes.
Would that be your expectation if you were incident commander at a fire?
I think that would be all incident commanders' expectation.
Could I ask you a question about the schedule of fire safety deficiencies dated 17th of November 2016? Have you ever seen a similar notice with a schedule before in your career? It's just that your evidence indicated that perhaps you hadn't been. I just want to clarify that.
Not that I can recall.
Okay. Looking at the system generally, have you ever encountered, you may not have seen the schedule itself, but have you ever encountered the information contained in a schedule being fed into a Section 72D visit process? Four final questions, brief ones. In terms of the premises information box, did you raise the absence of the PIB with Mr. Davis?
I can't remember, to be honest. I did have a conversation about my visit with Mr. Davis, and I may have raised it, but you'll have to clarify that with him.
Okay. Fireman's lift. How long would it have taken to test the operation of the lift?
5 to 10 minutes.
Would you have been able to carry out a test of the lift later on in the day? Would you have had the capacity on the 27th of March to come back and test the operation of the lift?
I don't believe so, no, because I think I had another 72D visit scheduled that day.
Okay. Third question, in terms of isolating the gas supply, how difficult would it have been, on the basis of what you saw in the basement, how difficult would it have been to have isolated the gas supply? What did it involve, the process?
I just think there was just two big levers. There was two big gas pipes, you know, sort of like 8 or 10 inch gas pipes, to the best of my recollection, and there was just two great big shut-off valves.
In your statement, you refer to alarm. Just may be useful if I take you to it. You refer to concern about the fire alarm panel. Did you ask, were you interested in the existence of alarms elsewhere in the building?
No, my expectation was that there'd be alarms throughout all the properties in the building and throughout all the common areas.
Okay. And again, this may be an obvious question. What was the basis of your expectation?
That's legislation.
Thank you. Mr. Ricketts, you may be relieved to know those are all the questions I have for you. The last thing for me is to say thank you very much for attending.
Thank you, sir. Thank you,
Yes,
sir.
and I thank you as well, because it's very important to us to hear all the evidence, including the evidence about visits to get information. So we're very grateful to you for coming to tell us what you were doing, and I'm glad to say that we have got you away by lunchtime. So if you go with the usher, she'll look after you.
Thank you, sir.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, that, as they say, Mr. Kinnear, is a convenient moment, I take it.
Very much so, sir. And the next witness will be Group Manager Davis.
Good. Right. Well, we'll rise now and we'll come back at 2 o'clock then, please.
Thanks, sir.
Continue. Thank you.